Chapter 466. The underground world hadn't changed much. Along the way, ugly goblins and batmen would often be seen looting everywhere. The entire underground world was filled with chaos, and it seemed that this situation wouldn't change even after a few hundred years. Gilbert, do you know what kind of disaster your tribe of dark dragons has encountered? Don't tell me you don't know anything at all? Han Shuo asked Gilbert as they walked towards the dark dragons. Master, I really don't know. Grandpa told me these things through the dragon speech bone. I really don't know anything. Gilbert felt very wronged as he answered with a long face and a bad mood. Gilbert was burning with anxiety along the way, constantly urging Han Shuo to hurry up. It seemed that although Gilbert had run away from home, he still had deep feelings for the dark dragons. Otherwise, he wouldn't have begged Han Shuo so bitterly. Having followed Han Shuo for so many years, although they had encountered some dangers, the two had always been able to turn them into safety. Inexplicably, Dark Dragon Gilbert felt that Han Shuo seemed to be able to handle all dangers, as if nothing could truly stump him. Especially after Han Shuo had come out of the cemetery of death a few days ago. The Dark Dragon who was linked to Han Shuo by contract knew better than anyone how terrifying Han Shuo's current strength was. Therefore, when he received his grandfather's message, he immediately thought of Han Shuo. He also believed that only Han Shuo could help the Dark Dragons survive this disaster. Seeing that he couldn't get anything out of Gilbert, Han Shuo didn't waste his breath. Gilbert's understanding of the underground world was clearly far greater than Han Shuo's. The two didn't waste too much time on the first layer where dark elves ran rampant. Under Gilbert's lead, Han Shuo descended from a precipitous cliff-like cave and arrived at the slightly dusky next layer. There was also light on this layer's walls, but it was a bit weaker than the previous layer. The light emitted by tall plants that could be seen everywhere made it possible to see everything clearly in the dusky layer, albeit with a little more effort. Follow me. Gilbert didn't say much. He led Han Shuo straight into a narrow tunnel, looking very anxious. Along the way, Han Shuo gained a rough understanding of the distribution of the underground world from Gilbert. The underground world was divided into 3 layers. The topmost layer was where the dark elves and lizard men resided. The creatures of this layer were the weakest. Even the ancient dark elves were weaker than the creatures of the 2 layers below. Of course, a freakish existence like the ancient lizard king was an exception. Existences like the ancient lizard king, who had climbed to the peak of rank 5 through evolution, were powerful existences anywhere on the profound continent. However, existences like him were few and far between. Most lizardmen were still stupid and couldn't be as lucky as him to evolve all the way to the 5th rank and obtain the tyrannical strength to leave this plane. The black dragons lived on the 2nd layer. Most of the creatures on this layer were extremely powerful. Other than the black dragons, who lived in groups, there were also some extremely powerful ranks surpassing magical beasts that lived alone. However, under normal circumstances, these ranks surpassing magical beasts had their own territories, and they usually minded their own business. From Dark Dragon Gilbert's words, Han Shuo understood that the dark dragons belonged to the kind of existences that no one dared to provoke in the 2nd layer. The dark dragons were a powerful race to begin with, and on top of that, they lived in groups. Not many creatures were willing to provoke them even in the 2nd layer of the underground world, where the strong were as numerous as trees in a forest. Therefore, from Gilbert's words, Han Shuo could basically rule out the possibility that they had encountered a fatal threat in the 2nd layer. The 3rd layer of the underground world was an incomparably mysterious area. From Gilbert's words, it seemed that no living creature knew what kind of creatures lived in the lower layers. Legend had it that there was indeed a passageway from the 2nd layer to the 3rd layer of the underground world. However, very few creatures knew of the existence of this passageway, and the super-rank magical beasts that were fortunate enough to pass through the passageway and enter the 3rd layer had never returned. Therefore, no one or any creature could truly understand the situation in the lowest layer of the underground world. After passing through the narrow passageway, Gilbert led Han Shuo for a long time before they arrived at an area filled with mountain ridges. This was a huge gorge. At a glance, there were undulating mountain ridges of uneven heights everywhere. From afar, it looked as if there were giant dragons entrenched here. There's the smell of blood. Once Han Shuo arrived at this area, his sensitive nose immediately picked up the faint scent of blood. Dark Dragon Gilbert's eyes immediately reddened as he cried excitedly, "Grandpa, I'm back! Gilbert is back!" Gilbert's voice reverberated endlessly in Tanai, containing a touching emotion. As he cried, he charged towards Tanai, and Han Shuo hurriedly followed him. "Go back!" From the deepest part of the gorge, an old, furious roar suddenly rang out. The roar was mixed with unconcealable fear. "Grandpa! It's my grandpa's voice." Gilbert was pleasantly surprised. He hurriedly said to Han Shuo, "My grandpa is still here, he's fine, but I think some of your clansmen have already died." Han Shuo shouted softly. He grabbed Dark Dragon Gilbert and suddenly sped up, charging towards Tanai like a bolt of lightning. On the back of a mountain ridge beneath their feet, the corpse of a nearly 30-meter-long dark dragon was exposed. Han Shuo and Gilbert flew in the air. When they looked down, they could see that this dark dragon's body had been cut by a sharp weapon. There were terrible wounds all over its body. "Uncle Trace." Gilbert obviously recognized the dead dark dragon as he roared furiously, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. However, this dark dragon wasn't the only corpse. As they flew in the direction of the gorge, 3 more dark dragon corpses appeared beneath their feet. These 3 dark dragons must have suffered cruel torture before they died. Each corpse was riddled with wounds, and one had even been chopped into 3 pieces, dying without a complete corpse. Gilbert recognized all 4 of these dead dark dragons, especially the huge dark dragon that had died in the most miserable state. Gilbert almost fainted from grief and indignation. When Dark Dragon Gilbert saw this corpse, he couldn't help but wail loudly, because that was Dark Dragon Gilbert's father. "Bastard! Run! Run quickly!" A crazed howl that sounded like it was dripping blood came from the distant canyon. It mixed with Gilbert's mournful cries, causing Han Shuo's heart to freeze to the extreme. He had the urge to kill the perpetrator by dismembering him into 1,000 pieces. Even if Han Shuo didn't use his consciousness to spy on the situation inside, he could still sense a few icy auras. One of them was especially tyrannical. Han Shuo even vaguely felt that it was somewhat similar to that of the water divine Magus Tiana. When this feeling arose in Han Shuo's heart, his desire to kill grew even stronger. "Let's go. Let's go to the gorge and see what's going on first." Han Shuo grabbed Dark Dragon Gilbert. Ignoring Dark Dragon Gilbert's loud wails, he flew towards the gorge with a gloomy face. "Another one. TSK. Interesting." A disdainful cold sneer suddenly came from the depths of the gorge. "I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them. No matter who they are, I'm going to kill them." Dark Dragon Gilbert kept repeating these words as he wailed. His usual carefree attitude had long since disappeared. At this moment, apart from grief and indignation, Gilbert probably only had bone-piercing hatred left in his heart. Finally, Han Shuo pulled Dark Dragon Gilbert along and arrived at the largest gorge. The first thing that entered Han Shuo's eyes was a huge, spotlessly white cage made of some unknown material. Inside the cage were 17 dark dragons with skin as dark as ink who had already taken human form. There were old and young people among them, and they all wore collars around their necks like dogs. All of them had bloodstains on their bodies from being whipped. Even a young female dark dragon was the same. Blood still flowed from the bloodstains on her cheeks, as if she had just been whipped. Surrounding the cage were 6 people dressed in clothes as white as snow. Their attire was very similar, and every one of their expressions was icy cold, carrying a natural indifference and ruthlessness. One of them, a handsome middle-aged man with a face as if carved from a blade, looked at Han Shuo and Gilbert with a cold smile, his hands clasped behind his back. The aura on his body was somewhat similar to Tiana's, and he was also the most powerful existence here, a demigod existence. "There's another little worm." The handsome middle-aged man looked at Gilbert as if he was looking at a pet, with a natural sense of superiority. Only after he finished speaking did he look Han Shuo up and down, and asked, "Who are you?" "You know Tiana, don't you?" Han Shuo answered with a question instead. Including the handsome middle-aged man, the expressions of the 6 people dressed in snow white changed slightly. The middle-aged man who was the leader frowned and said, "You actually know of my little junior sister's existence. Who are you? Who are you people?" Han Shua's heart suddenly jolted, and he immediately shouted, "We are from the Shrine of Ice. I am Ice Celestial Kori. Since you know my little junior sister, Snow Celestial Tiana, who are you? Are you friend or foe?" Kori, the Ice Celestial of the Shrine of Ice, asked coldly, his eyes fixed on Han Shua. Chapter 467. Like the Church of Light, the Shrine of Ice was also a relatively well-known religious organization on Profound Continent. The Shrine of Ice worshipped the Ice Goddess. Although this church's influence was not as great as that of the Church of Light, it was not to be belittled. The Shrine of Ice was the state religion of Kasi Empire. The Shrine of Ice was located on top of the coldest snowy mountain in Kasi Empire. Tiana, as the protector of Kasi Empire, was unexpectedly from the Shrine of Ice, and the snow goddess of the Shrine of Ice at that. Han Shua only understood these secrets from Kori. However, even Candide of the Dark Mantle didn't know these things. It seemed that this Shrine of Ice was rather mysterious. By now, Han Shua finally understood why Tiana would plot against him. The Church of Light and the Shrine of Ice had always been close. As the snow goddess of the Shrine of Ice, it was only natural that Tiana would frame them for the Church of Light. In front of Han Shua, a group of Shrine of Ice members, led by Ice Celestial Kori, were watching Han Shua vigilantly. Among them, Kori was the strongest, roughly on par with Han Shua in strength. The other 5 emanated icy auras, roughly at the level of sacred grade experts. The strength of this group was by no means weak. They would be a force that no one would dare to ignore in any country. It made sense. This was the second layer of the underground world. For them to dare to slaughter in the territory of dark dragons, they naturally had to possess a certain level of strength. It was also at this moment that Han Shua began to understand why Lawrence was so happy when he learned that Han Shua possessed demigod strength. Odin Empire had the Church of Light, and Kasi Empire had the Shrine of Ice. Generally speaking, religious organizations like these controlled terrifying experts. The reason why Lancelot Empire hadn't dared to go on expeditions for so many years was probably because they were apprehensive of the existence of those people. Soon after, another doubt surfaced in Han Shua's mind. Judging from the strength displayed by Kasi Empire, they had completely suppressed Lancelot Empire. Why hadn't Kasi Empire invaded Lancelot Empire for so many years? With just the Snow Goddess and the Ice Goddess, before he became a demigod, who in Lancelot Empire could stop them? Apart from that, there was also the Brute Merchant Alliance and the Angela Empire. Both of them had the support of powerful experts. Even the 7 Grand Duchies had the demigod old monster Statholm. If so, why had the Lancelot Empire remained unscathed for so many years? What do you mean? Just as Han Shua was letting his imagination run wild, Ice God shouted again. The bone-chilling sword in his hand was already unsheathed. Han Shua stared blankly for a moment before immediately coming to his senses. He then turned his head to look at Dark Dragon Gilbert, only to see that Gilbert was currently being cursed at by a thin and weak little old man in the cage behind Kori with tearful eyes. This little old man should be Gilbert's grandfather, the patriarch of the Dark Dragons, Gilgs. Although his tone was vile and angry, his anxious expression showed his concern. Gilbert turned a deaf ear to his grandfather's curses. He just glared at Ice Celestial Kori with a pair of eyes filled with bone-piercing hatred. Even though he did not practice the god-slaying devil path, the killing intent emanating from his body was still incomparably intense. It was a bloodthirsty desire to destroy everything. Nothing. Han Shua coldly snorted. He opened his hand and 5 dark rays shot out from his fingers, heading straight for the spotlessly white cage imprisoning the dark dragons. Contrary to Han Shua's expectations, Kori, who was standing beside the cage, did not make a move to intercept the attack. He merely wore a sneer of ridicule on his face as he looked at Han Shua disdainfully. The other 5 also had the same expression. The way they looked at Han Shua made Han Shua extremely unhappy. However, Han Shua soon found out why he had such a disdainful expression. Han Shua's 5 rays of light did not encounter any obstruction from Corey and the other 5. They directly bombarded the surface of the cage that was as spotlessly white as snow. Only a few clanging sounds could be heard. The cage remained unscathed under Han Shua's bombardment. Han Shua was stunned. He knew very well how terrifying the impact force contained in those 5 rays of light was. Even the hardest iron and stone would be pulverized. However, the cage remained unscathed under Han Shua's attack. This was clearly beyond Han Shua's expectations. This is a cage blessed by the snow goddess. If you can break it, we'll turn around and run. Ice Celestial Corey sneered as he looked at Han Shua. He pointed the ice-cold longsword in his hand at Han Shua and said, "It seems that you are the enemy." As soon as Corey's words fell, the 5 beside him simultaneously left the cage, as though they were not afraid of the cage being broken. Each and every one of them spread out with cold and detached expressions. They were probably prepared to make Han Shua and Dark Dragon Gilbert stay behind. Among the 6, Ice Celestial Corey was the strongest. Judging from the aura emanating from his body, he should be a magic swordsman. The long sword in his hand contained an enormous aura of ice. This kind of aura was mixed with pure and chilly divine energy. It was astonishingly similar to the divine energy of the Temple Knights of the Church of Light. These so-called churches were all like this. With devotion to the gods they believed in, they could always borrow some divine energy from their gods. Even if it was only a small portion of divine energy, it was enough for them to surpass their own shackles and possess power unimaginable to ordinary people. Seeing that the 6 fellows from the Shrine of Ice were slowly trying to surround him, Han Shua couldn't help but frown. If it was only Ice Celestial Corey, Han Shua wouldn't be afraid of him. After all, Han Shua was extremely confident in himself. However, if the 5 sacred grade experts were to be added to the mix, Han Shua would have some trouble dealing with them. Among the other 5, 2 of them were water sacred magi. At this moment, they had already begun to chant incantations. All of a sudden, the second layer of the underground world seemed to have turned into a world of ice and snow. A bone-chilling coldness pervaded the entire region in the blink of an eye. Friend, no matter who you are, don't even think of leaving safely today. Corey listened to the chanting of his subordinates as he advanced step by step towards Han Shua. The long sword in his hand was gradually covered in a layer of ice that was as bright and resplendent as a diamond. This layer of ice contained an incomparably chilling aura. Ganging up on me? Hee, I'm least afraid of being ganged up on. Han Shua was suddenly no longer worried. At once, he let out a mischievous laugh and took out the skeletal staff from his hand. Following the chanting of necromancy incantations, one undead creature after another appeared around Han Shua. Before Corey could get close to Han Shua, there was no longer an empty spot around Han Shua. All of them had been blocked by a dense horde of undead creatures. From low-level skeletal warriors and ghouls to evil knights, bone demons, and mummy lords, they were all present. Especially the Earth Elite Zombie and his gang of extremely strange fellows. Every one of them wore strange armors. Among them, the Metal Elite Zombie held a dazzling golden cudgel in his hand, while the Fire Elite Zombie held a pulsating fire attribute treasure, the Fire Lotus. Among undead creatures, this was an unspeakable oddity. You are actually a wretched necromancer. Corey was gobsmacked. Obviously, he was rather astonished that Han Shua could summon so many undead creatures. Hee, so what if I'm a necromancer? Even the entire race of dark dragons have been imprisoned in our hands. What do you think these low-level undead creatures can do to us? Corey was very conceited. Obviously, he did not attach any importance to the undead creatures summoned by Han Shua. Low-level? Han Shua sneered. Soon after, he secretly issued an order to the 5 elite zombies to find an opportunity to form the Penta-Elemental Undead Formation. As Little Skull was busy fusing his soul with the origin crystal of pure death, he did not appear this time. However, with the 5 elite zombies here, in addition to the 3 evil knights and the mummy lord, Han Shua still had the confidence to resist the 6 from the Shrine of Ice. However, to ensure that nothing went wrong, Han Shua first ordered the 5 elite zombies to prepare the Penta-Elemental Undead Formation. Although the 5 elite zombies were still unable to completely fuse all of their energies in this formation, from what Little Skull had said previously, Han Shuo understood that even the 5 elite zombies were extremely formidable. Master, I want revenge. I want to kill them. Dark Dragon Gilbert bellowed furiously. With just you lot? Corey sneered with extreme contempt. Then, with a face full of loathing, he shouted in a low voice, "Clean up these filthy, undead creatures for me." As soon as Ice Celestial Corey's words faded, the incantation that had been chanting all along suddenly came to a halt. Soon after, the entire region turned into a land of ice and snow. The coldness engulfed the entire canyon. Gigantic icicles and millstone-sized hailstones suddenly appeared, raining down on the undead creatures everywhere in the canyon. The magic of a sacred-grade magus was indeed terrifying, especially when it was released by 2 sacred-grade magi at the same time. The entire canyon became a frightening scene of icicles and hailstones raining down. The enormous number of undead creatures summoned by Han Shuo struck the low-level skeletal warriors and zombie warriors one after another. In an extremely short period of time, the thousands of undead creatures were smashed into pieces by the icicles and hailstones. However, starting from the hate warriors, the tough bodies of the high-level undead creatures were able to withstand the attacks. Naturally, high-level undead creatures like the Bone Demon and Mummy Lord were unscathed. The cold aura that spread throughout the entire canyon caused the dark dragons in the cages to shiver. However, to the undead creatures, the cold would never pose a threat to them. Under the hail of icicles, the undead creatures that were still alive lined up to attack Corey and the others. Chapter 468. The 3 evil knights that had been refined by Han Shuo previously had armor that shone as bright as mirrors. Each of them wielded extremely long, sharp bone spurs that emanated a dense aura of death. They charged at the very front. The fire-breathing warhorses beneath the evil knights were extremely tall and large. The evil knights wielding the enormous bone spurs were also incomparably valiant. They charged head-on towards Corey's party, the aura of death rippling out endlessly. Behind the 3 evil knights were another 5 evil knights that had not been refined by demonic arts, followed by the Mummy Lord and the Bone Devil. As for the 5 eccentric elite zombies, the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie used their innate abilities to conceal themselves in the depths of the earth, and the other to vanish into a strange plant. The Fire Elite Zombie, Water Elite Zombie, and Metal Elite Zombie mixed in with the zombie warriors that were lucky enough to survive. They slowly spread out and surrounded Corey's party. Corey's eyes were like lightning. The icy sword in his hand that was covered in a layer of diamond ice continuously emitted a bone-chilling aura. Without waiting for the 3 evil knights to approach, Corey suddenly let out a cold snort and fiercely brandished the long sword in his hand. Colorless fighting aura mixed with a chilling aura flew out from the long sword, aiming straight for the 3 evil knights riding their fire-breathing warhorses. The originally colorless fighting aura, which could freeze any ordinary creature, immediately converged at the location of the colorless fighting aura. The originally colorless and formless fighting aura shot out explosively, instantly absorbing the cold air and transforming it into an enormous icicle that sparkled with cold light. Infused with an unstoppable fighting aura, the icicle flew straight towards the 3 evil knights. Standing beside Dark Dragon Gilbert, the corners of Han Shuo's mouth hooked into a sneer. He suddenly disappeared, and when his body reappeared, he was already standing proudly in the air in front of the 3 evil knights. He fiercely punched down from above. Like a red dragon shooting out from Han Shuo's hand, Han Shuo's fist pulsated with fiery red demonic flames under the activation of the mystical glacial spellfire. It carried scorching light and heat as it struck the center of the enormous icicle. Creak! A crisp sound of ice shattering resounded. Due to the effect of Han Shuo's ferocious strength, the devil flame, which resembled a thin dragon, directly smashed a large hole into the icicle. Soon after, the high heat of the devil flame was released, evaporating the icicle along with Corey's invisible Do Chi. Your opponent is me. Han Shuo strode across the void, approaching the ice god of the Shrine of Ice step by step. Blazing flames burned fiercely in both of his hands. He first issued an order to Earth Elite Zombie, and then instructed Dark Dragon Gilbert from afar, "Just take good care of your grandfather later." Due to the magic jointly released by two sacred grade magi, the entire area was filled with bone-chilling coldness. Ice shards and snowflakes filled the air as they danced in the air. It was as though this place was the snowy mountain where the Shrine of Ice was located. Perhaps because their physical strength was restricted, the dozen or so dark dragons that were imprisoned were shivering from the cold. As for that dark-skinned girl covered in cuts and bruises, it was unknown whether it was because of the cold or the ice shards that landed on her face, but her skin actually appeared a little fairer. As soon as those words left Han Shua's mouth, the floor of the cage that imprisoned the dozen or so dark dragons suddenly caved in to reveal a pitch-black hole. Amidst the dark dragon's panicked cries, the entire cage rapidly fell into the pitch-black hole. At the same time, beneath Dark Dragon Gilbert's feet, a tunnel leading to the underground was similarly formed. Gilbert immediately reacted and hastily leaped into the tunnel. After the cage and Dark Dragon Gilbert fell into the tunnel together, the two strangely appearing caves, under the attentive gazes of the Shrine of Ice experts, miraculously closed up again. Before they could even react, the two caves had completely disappeared, and the ground was restored to its smooth and flat state. "My lord, Lord Corey, the Jade Frost cage is gone." Suddenly, the Archmage who had just chanted an incantation cried out in alarm. Corey was brandishing his sword to ward off the extremely tricky fireballs. When he heard the cry of alarm from his subordinates behind him, he took a quick glance behind him. Soon after, his complexion turned incomparably ugly. Ice Celestial Corey, who had been fending off the attacks of the fireballs, suddenly erupted with a frighteningly cold air. All of a sudden, cold air rapidly gathered around Corey. Apart from Corey, the rest of the space seemed to be frozen by the cold air. An enormous block of solid ice appeared out of thin air. The two spinning fireballs controlled by Han Shua were also frozen within that enormous block of ice. Before Han Shua could react, several dozen strands of cold air abruptly attached themselves to the solid ice. Like silver snakes, they began to circulate at high speed within the solid ice, all converging on the fireballs locked in the solid ice. Thick white smoke immediately emanated from the area where the two balls of demonic flame were frozen. Han Shua could sense that the demonic yuan contained within the two balls of demonic flame was being consumed bit by bit under the constant stimulation of dozens of strands of frigid air. Corey was at the center of that enormous block of solid ice. As the one releasing it, Corey was obviously unaffected by the solid ice. He stared coldly at Han Shua and suddenly flew towards Han Shua at high speed. That enormous block of solid ice that completely locked the space around Han Shua, as though it had no weight at all, actually flew at the same speed as Corey towards Han Shua. Midway through, the thick white smoke rising from the solid ice had already disappeared. The two fireballs were finally completely depleted of demonic yuan by several dozen strands of cold air. There was no longer any trace of their existence. Under Han Shua's command, the high-level undead creatures that were unaffected by the previous wave of ice magic circled around Corey and charged towards the 5 most powerful experts of the Shrine of Ice. The 5 elite zombies also rapidly spread out and started preparing to release the Penta-Elemental Undead formation. When Han Shua saw that Corey was flying towards him with a huge block of solid ice, his 2 hands whirled at high speed. All kinds of strange demonic arts suddenly whizzed out. Those indestructible demonic lights bombarded the surface of that enormous block of solid ice, producing pleasing tinkling sounds. However, this enormous block of solid ice that was constantly absorbing the frigid air of the entire area seemed to be the hardest substance. When Han Shua's secret demonic arts bombarded the enormous block of solid ice, he could at most penetrate a meter deep. He had absolutely no way of penetrating the solid ice to attack Corey, who was at the center. "Ice Celestial Corey, your reputation is indeed well-deserved," Han Shua praised in his heart. While releasing all kinds of dazzling attacks on the solid ice, he rapidly dodged and hastily thought of a way to break the solid ice. As the Demon's Lair edge had yet to fuse with the ball of destruction, Han Shua, who had yet to find a way to break the solid ice, had no choice but to dodge quickly. Fortunately, Han Shuo had always held the advantage in terms of speed. Although Corey was chasing after Han Shuo with the enormous block of solid ice, he couldn't even get close to the corner of Han Shuo's clothes. One couldn't break the solid ice, the other couldn't catch up to the other. The two temporarily fell into a deadlock. "Father, I'm coming. Father, I'm coming." It was at this moment that Han Shuo suddenly received messages from Fire and Metal Elite zombies. The two were brimming with confidence. They transmitted the message to Han Shuo's mind almost at the same time. Then, the two charged at Corey at the same time. Metal Elite Zombie and Fire Elite Zombie. One wielded the all-conquering metal attribute treasure, the Golden Cudgel, while the other wielded the fire attribute treasure, the Fire Lotus, that could incinerate all things. Han Shuo suddenly came to his senses. He couldn't help but feel relieved and started plotting how to beat them when they were down. Chapter 469. Facts had proven that the Metal Elite Zombie who had obtained the Golden Cudgel and the Fire Elite Zombie who had obtained the Fire Lotus could indeed release extraordinary strength. Under Metal Elite Zombie's manipulation, the Golden Cudgel transformed into a dazzling golden pillar. Carrying a force of hundreds of millions of kilograms, it bombarded the enormous block of ice surrounding Ice Celestial Corey. Frightening cracking sounds suddenly erupted from the block of ice. Ice Celestial Corey, who was at the center, suddenly felt an unparalleled force rushing towards him, causing his body to shake violently and his aura to become unstable. Fire Elite Zombie followed closely behind. The Fire Lotus in Fire Elite Zombie's hand blossomed into blazing flames. They constantly leaped out from the Fire Lotus and landed on the block of ice that had yet to completely shatter. Thick smoke was suddenly released from the point of contact between the ice and fire. Corey turned pale with fright. If Han Shuo had used some miraculous martial technique to break this move of his, then perhaps he wouldn't have been so astonished. However, for two oddball zombie warriors to be able to break through his ice imbued with the energy of the ice goddess, this was beyond his imagination. What the hell are these? Corey was stunned by Fire Elite Zombie and Metal Elite Zombie. He tightly clenched the long sword in his hand that was covered in a layer of diamond-hard ice. He looked at Fire Elite Zombie and Metal Elite Zombie in a rather flustered manner. It was at this moment that Han Shuo suddenly shot out from the thick smoke. The demonic blades had caused Han Shuo's fingernails to grow a meter long. Han Shuo flew towards Corey like a demon. It was as though Han Shuo's two hands were weaving an invisible net. As they danced in the air, streaks of incisive demonic light shot out and formed a giant net that trapped Corey. Corey's mind was in turmoil. One Han Shuo was already extremely difficult to deal with. On top of that, Fire Elite Zombie was refined purely from the Yuan energy of fire. The Fire Lotus in his hand seemed to faintly restrain him. This feeling made Corey extremely uncomfortable. When he saw Han Shuo charging at him, he used the long sword in his hand to shoot out streaks of solid ice while continuously retreating. Suddenly, right in front of Corey, Han Shuo's figure gradually faded until it disappeared. However, that sense of danger did not diminish, but instead grew stronger and stronger. To Corey, this made him very unhappy. One after another, icicles burst out from the long sword in his hand, shooting out in all directions with him as the center. After losing track of Han Shuo, this was the best method of attack Corey could think of. Under Corey's full-range attack, the large net that was descending upon him seemed to be destroyed and dissipated by the bombardment of the icicles. However, Corey did not feel any sense of relief in his heart. When Han Shuo could no longer sense the auras of the six, the cold and dense world of ice and snow that enveloped the entire canyon was still present. However, not a single snowflake could be seen drifting down from the sky. The undead creatures that had lost their targets stood blankly on the spot, waiting for Han Shuo's orders, not knowing what to do. "Father, they're gone." Earth Elite Zombie slowly emerged from beneath Han Shuo's feet and transmitted. They actually escaped. This method of escape is truly miraculous. They actually melted into the snow. Han Shuo mumbled to himself. Soon after, he said to Earth Elite Zombie, "Open the underground tunnel and get Dark Dragon Gilbert and the cage out." "All right." Earth Elite Zombie straightforwardly replied. Soon after, the ground beside the two suddenly split open to reveal a cave. From within, Dark Dragon Gilbert and the dark dragons in the cage emerged. Gilbert was lying on top of the cage, his tears flowing into the cage uncontrollably. He didn't say a single word, but continuously wailed at the patriarch of the dark dragons, Gilgs. His grandfather's eyes were bloodshot and old tears were rolling down his cheeks. He choked with sobs as he consoled Gilbert. After glancing at Gilbert and the dark dragons in the cage, Han Shuo quietly distanced himself from them. Han Shuo knew that it was best to give them some time to be alone. Moreover, Gilgs might tell Gilbert some secrets about the dark dragons. It wouldn't be appropriate for him to stay here. As the temperature in this region had returned to normal, the ice and snow that previously covered the earth gradually melted. Han Shuo sent the undead creatures back to the netherworld one by one. Then, he pondered about the purpose of the Shrine of Ice's visit. The Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light were on very good terms. Although the doctrines they preached were different, most people knew that they were allies in private. Based on Han Shuo's loathing of the Church of Light, in addition to Tiana's betrayal, Han Shuo naturally regarded the Shrine of Ice as an enemy. Although Ice Celestial Kori managed to escape by relying on the boundless snow this time, Han Shuo had left an unforgettable mark on his body. In addition to his relationship with Tiana, the enmity between him and the Shrine of Ice would be difficult to resolve. Han Shuo had already begun to ponder how to deal with the Shrine of Ice. While Han Shuo was pondering, he suddenly received a message from Gilbert asking him to go over. Without hesitation, Han Shuo immediately went over to Gilbert's side. He saw that although Gilbert still had a sorrowful look on his face, his emotions had somewhat stabilized. The dozen or so dark dragons in the cage were all looking at Han Shuo. Gilbert's grandfather, Gilgs, kowtowed to Han Shuo from within the cage, sincerely thanking him. When Gilbert returned the last time, I heard of your deeds. I didn't expect that you would be the one to save us dark dragons this time. On behalf of the dark dragons, I thank you for your great kindness. You're welcome. The relationship between me and Gilbert isn't what you imagine it to be. It's only right that I help you. Han Shuo hastily waved his hand, indicating that Gilgs need not be so courteous. I understand. Most people wouldn't be willing to risk their lives for the sake of a magical pet. For you to come all the way here to help us dark dragons because of Gilbert, this is sufficient proof of your kindness to Gilbert. It is indeed his good fortune to be able to follow you. Gilgs was definitely a reasonable person. From the moment Han Shuo and Gilbert came here, he knew that Gilbert had indeed followed the right person. Grandpa, don't talk about these useless things, Gilbert complained. Then, he looked at Han Shuo anxiously and said, Master, can you open this damned cage? I've tried many ways, but I can't break this cage at all. Let me try again. However, this cage that Kori said had been blessed by the ice goddess did indeed contain a bizarre divine energy. When Han Shuo's fierce attacks landed, they were all frozen by the bone-chilling divine energy. He was unable to break open the cage. That's right, it's right, Han Shuo replied before he started to use several demonic arts. The main soul within the demon's lair edge was in the midst of fusing with the energy of the ball of destruction. At this moment, the demon's lair edge needed to be absolutely silent. Otherwise, with the help of the inconceivably sharp demon's lair edge, Han Shuo was confident that he could break this cage. However, without the demon's lair edge in hand, Han Shuo was really having a headache for the time being. The golden cudgel in Metal Elite Zombie's hand was indestructible. However, if the cudgel smashed down, the dozen or so dark dragons that were already on their last breaths inside would be finished before the cage was broken. Han Shuo knitted his brows as he thought to himself as he gazed at the cage. If this cage didn't contain the divine energy of the ice goddess, Han Shuo was confident that he could break it. But now, he was truly at his wit's end. Just as Han Shuo was having a headache, he suddenly thought of a person. He softly cried out, "There might be a way." Chapter 470. What is it? Gilbert hastily asked. Elizabeth of Bretel City. Perhaps she can help us. Han Shuo explained. As a target of the Church of Light, Elizabeth possessed a bizarre body of divine grace that possessed the miraculous ability to absorb the divine energy of the Church of Light. Han Shuo had a vague feeling that perhaps she could remove the divine energy of the ice goddess contained within the cage. Once the Jade Frost cage was no longer protected by the divine energy of the ice goddess, Han Shuo was 100% certain that he could break it. Gilbert evidently didn't quite believe it. After staring blankly for a moment, seeing that Han Shuo seemed to be somewhat confident, he couldn't help but ask, "Can she be trusted?" "I'm not too sure myself, but there's no harm in trying." Han Shuo replied, "You're Brian, right?" Within the cage beneath Dark Dragon Gilbert, the patriarch of Dark Dragons, Gilgs, raised his head and asked Han Shuo. "Yep." Han Shuo replied, "Thank you for your rescue. The Dark Dragon clan will forever remember your kindness." Gilgs kowtowed to Han Shuo. Soon after, he raised his head and said, "The Shrine of Ice has come here, killed our people, and imprisoned us here. Firstly, they intend to turn us dark dragons into their mounts. Secondly, they want to learn the path to the third layer of the underground world from me." The third layer of the underground world. Han Shuo was shocked. He then looked at the patriarch of Dark Dragons with glistening eyes and asked, "What's the situation?" Since Gilgs took the initiative to reveal the situation of the third layer of the underground world to Han Shuo, it seemed that he was prepared to tell Han Shuo the whole story. This was somewhat out of Han Shuo's expectations. 2 years ago, Gilbert returned once. From Gilbert, I learned that you were the owner of the skeletal magic staff. That was also the reason why I didn't stop Gilbert from following you, because the owner of the skeletal magic staff definitely wouldn't be an enemy of our Dark Dragon race. The patriarch of the Dark Dragon race looked deeply at Han Shuo as he spoke in a deep voice. Han Shuo was even more bewildered. It seemed that Gilgs also understood some of the origins of the skeletal staff. He couldn't help but take out the skeletal staff and fiddle with it for a while. He sized up Gilgs, the patriarch of Dark Dragons, and asked, "Why do you say so?" "Because 5,000 years ago, the Black Dragon clan had been fighting under the command of the original owner of the skeletal staff. We, the Dark Dragon race, have always lived in the second layer of the underground world under the orders of the original owner of the skeletal staff to prevent anyone from trespassing into the third layer of the underground world. I also heard some things about you and Ancient Lizard King Degassi from Gilbert. The Ancient Lizard King was his magical pet back then. Degassi must have told you some things, right?" Gilgs asked. "No, Degassi didn't talk about the past in depth. He only told me that I could obtain the truth from the skeletal magic staff. However, I still haven't completely grasped the secrets of the skeletal magic staff. Therefore, for the time being, I don't know what happened 5,000 years ago. If you know, I hope you can tell me." Han Shuo's heart was filled with doubts as he looked at the patriarch of the Dark Dragon race, Gilgs. Gilgs shook his head with a wry smile. Soon after, he saw the longing look in Han Shuo's eyes. He forcibly shook his spirit and said, "I have only lived for 2,000 years. I only know these things from the ancient records left behind by my ancestors. My knowledge is also very limited." "What do you know?" Han Shuo asked. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, Gilgs pondered for a moment before he said, 5,000 years ago, there was a great war that involved all the experts on the profound continent. That war was extremely bitter and desperate. It seemed that there were even experts from other material planes involved. The side of the skeletal magic staff's owner and our Dark Dragon race should have lost in that great war. Some of the main leaders were killed while others fled. Our side suffered disastrous losses. It is said that several of our powerful races have vanished from the profound continent forever. Our Dark Dragon race can be considered lucky. Although we have been holed up in the second layer of the underground world forever, at least we haven't been exterminated. I don't know about the situation of the other races, but our Dark Dragon race has been staying in the second layer of the underground world under the orders of the original owner of the skeletal magic staff. On one hand, it was to avoid being hunted down by the victors, and on the other hand, to guard the passage to the third layer of the underground world. When the owner of the skeletal magic staff gave us this order, he also said with certainty that after 5,000 years, powerful enemies would descend upon us. He said that as long as we could avoid this calamity and guard the passage for 5,000 years, we would be able to leave the second layer of the underground world. That's all I know. As for what happened 5,000 years ago, why did we lose so miserably? Who were the enemies? What is in the third layer of the underground world? I don't know about that. After Gilgs finished speaking, Han Shuo couldn't help but fall into contemplation. He was certain that the original owner of the skeletal magic staff should be one of the leaders of the dark dragon race 5,000 years ago. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to command the dark dragon race in such a manner. In addition, the original owner of the skeletal magic staff should still be alive. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left so many tricks up his sleeve. It was also from this moment onwards that Han Shuo felt that the legends regarding the Cemetery of Death in the outside world weren't absolutely true. According to the legends, the Cemetery of Death was originally created by a group of necromancers. They used the Cemetery of Death to research the profound mysteries of necromancy magic and committed many outrageous acts. In the end, the Cemetery of Death was destroyed by the combined efforts of mages of various elements. The Cemetery of Death also completely disappeared. As a necromancer, Han Shuo had heard of many of these legends. However, according to the timeline, these legends occurred no more than 1,000 years ago. Now that he heard Gilbert talk about the events of 5,000 years ago, Han Shuo suddenly felt that the Cemetery of Death should have existed for a longer time. Suddenly, Han Shuo recalled that Gilgs had lived for more than 2,000 years. He immediately asked, "You have lived for more than 2,000 years. Do you know of the existence of the Cemetery of Death and the legend regarding the Cemetery of Death?" Of course. During these 2,000 years, I'm not completely ignorant of the matters of the outside world. I still know a little about some important matters. Gilgs nodded and immediately asked, "What legend are you referring to about the Cemetery of Death?" Han Shuo was overjoyed. He hastily described the legend regarding the Cemetery of Death in the human world. Soon after, he looked at Gilbert with sparkling eyes and asked, "Is that the truth?" Gilbert shook his head and said, "It's true that a group of necromancers gathered in the Cemetery of Death 1,000 years ago. They researched many kinds of evil necromancy magic. In the end, it's not a problem for them to be hunted to death by the combined efforts of mages from various countries. However, the Cemetery of Death was definitely not built by them. Just like you, they are only the owners of the Cemetery of Death, not the creators. Although there is no conclusive evidence, I have always believed that the Cemetery of Death should have been built by the original owner of the skeletal staff. It should be the same as us dark dragons who have been guarding the passageway from the second to the third layer of the underground world for the past 5,000 years. The original owner of the skeletal staff must have had his reasons for building the Cemetery of Death. Then, do you know the origins and situation of the Calamity Church? They don't seem to have appeared on the profound continent for very long. Why do they consider the Cemetery of Death to be the sacred ground of the Calamity Church? Why do they know about the 3 miraculous functions of the skeletal staff? Han Shuo was somewhat impatient as he continued to ask Gilgs with a hurried tone, "I do know a little about the Calamity Church. Apart from the fact that the Cemetery of Death wasn't built by those necromancers, most of the rest of the legends are true. As for the Calamity Church, it was actually established by a group of necromancers who originally owned the Cemetery of Death. Back then, they had created many terrifying spells in the Cemetery of Death. In particular, the appearance of the plague spell had caused many humans in the city to become undead creatures. Therefore, they became the public enemy of the entire continent. In the end, they were besieged and annihilated by experts from various countries. However, their vitality was extremely tenacious. They weren't completely annihilated under the encirclement of various countries. However, those who were fortunate enough to survive no longer dared to show themselves in public like they used to. They would forever hide in the darkness. It must be said that these people were truly incomparably powerful. Not only were they not completely annihilated under the encirclement of the entire continent, those who were fortunate enough to survive grew stronger and stronger. Moreover, they became more and more proficient in the field of necromancy magic. They even began to absorb all kinds of evil experts from the profound continent. This continued until those powerful necromancers reached new heights in their research in the field of magic. After gaining the ability to communicate with evil gods and demons, they founded the Calamity Church. They worshipped evil gods and absorbed more and more evil people from the profound continent. They reached a state where only the Church of Light could barely suppress them. The Cemetery of Death was their birthplace. It was also the place where the first generation of Calamity Church higher-ups researched necromancy magic. It was only natural that they would regard the Cemetery of Death as the sacred ground of the Calamity Church. Gilgs looked at Han Shuo and explained tirelessly, "So that's how it is." Han Shuo finally understood the relationship between the Cemetery of Death and the Calamity Church after listening to Gilg's explanation. It turned out that the Cemetery of Death was actually the laboratory of those evil necromancers of the first generation of the Calamity Church. The founders of the Calamity Church researched those evil magics in the Cemetery of Death. No wonder Wolf kept saying that Han Shuo was one of them. Chapter 471. In that case, do you know why this Cemetery of Death and the skeletal staff disappeared together? With Gilg's description, Han Shuo easily figured out what had happened. The only thing that Han Shuo couldn't figure out was why the skeletal staff would be lost from the hands of the Calamity Church. I don't know either. Ever since those ancient necromancers were encircled and exterminated, the Cemetery of Death disappeared along with them. Even after the Calamity Church was established, the Cemetery of Death never reappeared. Now that you have obtained the skeletal staff and obtained the ability to enter and leave the Cemetery of Death as you please, the Cemetery of Death reappeared after 1,000 years. Gilgs, the patriarch of the Dark Dragons, shook his head. It seemed that he was also unclear about the inside story. Soon after, Han Shuo inquired about the Calamity Church's Cemetery of Death. However, this time, Gilgs similarly couldn't answer. It seemed that this was all he knew. Right, do you still want to stay here? Han Shuo was not able to obtain any more useful information from Gilgs, so he prepared to leave. We need to discuss this. Also, we need to bury the corpses of our children. When this matter was brought up, Gilgs was once again very sorrowful. Master, I also want to bury my father. From today onwards, as long as I, Gilbert, am alive, I will thoroughly annihilate the Shrine of Ice. Gilbert's gaze was resolute. It seemed that he had regarded the Shrine of Ice as his mortal enemy. Creasing his brows, Han Shuo actually wanted to leave this place first. After all, there were still many matters he needed to take care of in the world above ground. However, he didn't know when those from the Shrine of Ice would come. If by any chance they came again and he wasn't here, the race of dark dragons would once again be hard-pressed to escape misfortune. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo said, "First, take care of the matters here, then leave this place." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo summoned the Earth Elite Zombie, as well as many zombie warriors in passing. After issuing an order to the Earth Elite Zombie, Han Shuo said to Gilbert, "Let him help you. Bury your father's corpse first. I will stay here and wait for a few days. When all the matters here have been taken care of, take the cage and we will leave together." "Thank you, Master," Gilbert said. Hence, Han Shuo temporarily stayed in the canyon. Under his grandfather's instructions, Gilbert buried the dead Black Dragon's corpse according to the Black Dragon clan's ritual. Then, they discussed their future plans in the cage. Han Shuo also stayed here, but he stayed away from the area with Gilbert and the others. He diligently studied the mysteries of the 3 boundaries that he had obtained last time. After Han Shuo successfully released the weakness boundary, Han Shuo quickly found the trick to releasing the fear boundary. In just 2 days, he could skillfully release the fear boundary. The ward of weakness and the ward of fear were very similar. Han Shuo didn't spend too much time mastering them. When it came to the ward of aging, he was a little confused. For the next 3 days, Han Shuo continued to study the method to release the aging ward. He tried many times, but he was unable to form the aging ward even once. 5 days later, with the help of Earth Elite Zombie, the dead Black Dragons were properly buried. Gilbert had also stabilized his chaotic state of mind during these 5 days. His grandfather, Gilgs, also planned to leave this place for the time being. On one hand, He had to open the cage, and on the other hand, he had to prevent those from the Shrine of Ice from coming again. It was unknown whether it was because Gilgs and the others had the same weight as humans after transforming into human form, or because of the special structure of the cage. Dark Dragon Gilbert carried the enormous cage that was completely out of sync with his body. He followed behind Han Shuo and left the place, flying to the first layer according to the path they came from. Before they reached the first layer, Han Shuo suddenly sensed a few weak auras coming from the entrance above. This put Han Shuo on guard. However, these auras really didn't pose any threat to Han Shuo. Therefore, he wasn't really worried. When Han Shuo and Dark Dragon Gilbert walked out of the passageway to the second layer, they finally discovered who were guarding the entrance. 5 mature dark elves who had once had sex with Han Shuo were elegantly waiting at the entrance with a group of dark elves. Among them, when Serene saw Han Shuo, her pretty face immediately blossomed. She laughed in a very licentious manner and said, "Oh my, it's really you. You've come all the way here. Why don't you come to our clan as a guest? Are you looking down on us dark elves?" Ever since Han Shuo had gotten rid of Adele, these 5 had become the new leaders of the Dark Elves. In the beginning, Han Shuo had maintained contact with the underground world. Later on, after Trunks had taken control of the Valley of Sunshine, Trunks' people had gradually begun to trade with the Dark Elves of the underground world. The underground world was rich in crystals and peculiar ores, including some rare treasures that couldn't be found on the surface. The Dark Elves were a race that loved to enjoy life. As the trading point for several countries, the Valley of Sunshine had too many goods for enjoyment. In these few years, the benefits that Trunks had obtained from trading in the underground world were much more than the gold coins he had obtained from missions. "How did you know I was here?" Han Shuo looked at this dark elf, his brows slightly furrowed as he asked in puzzlement. "Hee, after you entered the underground world, you rushed all the way here. On the way, many Batmen and goblins discovered you. Those filthy things now tell us any information about strangers in exchange for some food. That's why I learned of your whereabouts from them as soon as you entered the exit of the second layer." Shiralin first explained to Han Shuo, then immediately giggled. "Although you've rarely entered the underground world these years, we wouldn't have been able to obtain so many rare things from Trunks without your help. Since you've come to the underground world, we, as your hosts, naturally have to fulfill our duties as hosts. So that's how it is." Han Shuo laughed, then said very politely, "Thank you very much, but I'm a bit busy this time and really don't have much time. The next time I come to the underground world, I'll definitely pay you a visit." Gilbert was dragging that enormous cage. It looked very strange for him to drag such an enormous cage after transforming into his human form, as if he was carrying a small mountain. As soon as Gilbert emerged from below, he glanced at the Dark Elves with a bit of loathing on his face. If it wasn't for Gilbert's father's death, these Dark Elves would all be his prey based on his Dark Dragon race's perverted nature. But Gilbert had been in a bad mood recently, and Shiralin and the others' request had delayed his time to free the Dark Dragons. Naturally, he wasn't in a good mood. "It's him, that Dark Dragon." Behind Shiralin, a dark elf who had once seen Gilbert hastily spoke up for Shiralin in a low voice. Then, Shiran took another careful look at Gilbert, and then looked at the few black dragons in Gilbert's cage with sparkling eyes. She had a thoughtful expression on her face. After a while, a beautiful and pure young dark elf beside Shiralin suddenly coughed lightly. Shiralin was startled and couldn't help but turn around to look at the beautiful young dark elf. The expression in her eyes was a bit complicated, but she quickly returned to normal. "All right then, but since you've come to the underground world with great difficulty, we can't let you return empty-handed." Shiralin looked at the young dark elf and seemed to have received some sort of instruction. She pointed at the young girl with a beaming smile and said to Han Shuo, "This is the most beautiful girl of our race right now. Hee, she's even clean. You're our best friend, so I'll give her to you now. Whether she's a servant or a slave, it's all up to you. But you must accept her, or you'll be looking down on us dark elves." To Han Shuo's surprise, Shiralin actually insisted on giving her to Han Shuo after taking a look at the beautiful and pure dark elf girl. While Han Shuo was surprised, he couldn't help but carefully size up the beautiful dark elf. Han Shuo only needed a glance to discover that this dark elf was indeed extremely beautiful. Standing in the middle of Xiaolan's group of 5 beautiful women, her pure and youthful aura was even more eye-catching. She was different from other dark elves. There seemed to be a very clean aura on her body. She probably hadn't been influenced by the obscene culture of the dark elves. She timidly looked at Han Shuo, giving off a kind of delicate and pitiful feeling that would make one feel pity for her. Han Shuo had a very familiar feeling as he deeply sized up this young and beautiful dark elf girl. It was as if he'd known this girl for a long time. It was a very strange feeling. Han Shuo carefully thought for a moment. He'd gone back and forth to the underground world many times, but he was sure that he'd never seen this girl before. This made him a bit puzzled. Could it be that we really hit it off at first sight? Han Shuo thought to himself. He couldn't help but size up this girl even more strangely. You must accept her, or you'll be looking down on us dark elves. Xiaolan didn't know what was going on, but she insisted on pushing this girl to Han Shuo. It was as if Han Shuo didn't accept this girl, he would be an enemy of her race from now on. All right then, come with me. It wasn't a big deal to have another servant in the city lord's mansion in Bretel City. Han Shuo didn't want to cause trouble for Trunks over this matter, so he readily agreed. In this way, Xiaolan and the others no longer obstructed Han Shuo. They chatted cheerfully and wittily along the way as they escorted Han Shuo to the exit. Chapter 472. In the underground world, dark elves were kings and reigned supreme. However, once dark elves appeared on the surface of profound continent, they would be captured as prey by humans. The beauty of female elves and the attainments of male elves in the field of magical weapons were irresistible to humans. On profound continent, there had never been a lack of hunters hunting elves, especially female elves. They had even become the signboard of a great aristocrat. This beautiful dark elf by the name of Crowley was actually able to maintain her virginity among dark elves with an innately lecherous nature. This piqued Han Shuo's interest. As soon as they left the underground world, Han Shuo asked, Crowley, why did Xiaolan and the others send you to me as a slave? Were you coerced by them? Crowley had a terrified expression on her face. She hastily kowtowed to Han Shuo and said, Master, you are the benefactor of us dark elves. It is my honor to serve you. Han Shuo waved his hand and did not continue to speak. However, he had some doubts along the way. He felt that Crowley seemed somewhat familiar. But after carefully thinking for a long time, he was certain that he had never met her before. Brian, I have a few words to discuss with you alone. The imprisoned dark dragon patriarch, Gilgs, suddenly said after exiting the underground world. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment, but soon after, he nodded and said to Crowley, Leave us for a moment. Crowley shot a glance at Gilgs, replied respectfully, Yes, master. Then, she left the place. After Crowley was far away, Han Shuo watched as Gilbert put down the cage that imprisoned his grandfather. He then saw Gilgs looking at Crowley from afar. He creased his brows and said, Brian, I feel that there's something wrong with that dark elf. There's something familiar about her. Upon hearing Gilg's words, Han Shuo's heart tightened. He immediately cried out in alarm. You feel the same way too? I don't know why, but when I was in the tunnel just now, this dark elf kept sizing me up in the darkness. I feel that she wants to harm me, Gilgs said in a low voice with his brows creased. Gilgs furrowed his brows and said in a low voice. Soon after, he appeared a little embarrassed, but it might be because I'm old and a little too nervous and sensitive. Han Shuo didn't think so. The older one was, the more they would notice the details. They had an insight that younger people couldn't have. With regards to this Crowley, Han Shuo had always felt that there was something odd about her. Now that he heard Gilg's words, he immediately became vigilant. Gazing at the slender, graceful, and charming dark elf in the distance, Han Shuo couldn't help but cautiously release his consciousness and slowly sense Crowley's aura. Indeed, Crowley didn't have the lewd aura that a female dark elf should have. However, When Han Shuai used his divine sense to sense her seriously, he felt that Crowley really was a little unusual. It was precisely because her aura was too different from that of an ordinary female dark elf that Han Shuai felt suspicious. If he closed his eyes and didn't look at her, Han Shuai definitely wouldn't treat her as a dark elf based on his senses alone. Come to think of it, it's strange. Although I've lived in the underground world for many years, I haven't come into contact with many dark elves. Only that Adele that I've imprisoned has stayed with us for a longer period of time. Why do I sense a familiar aura from this young dark elf? While Han Shuai was slowly using his consciousness to observe Crowley, the dark dragon patriarch, Gilgs, was muttering to himself. Grandpa, you must be mistaken. I also know that Adele. She has a bewitching aura on her. One look at her, and you'll know that she's a slut. However, this Crowley feels very pure and clean. If it weren't for the fact that she indeed looks like a dark elf, I would really think that she's a forest elf. Dark Dragon Gilbert interrupted. Han Shuai was suddenly startled. Then, his eyes brightened as he stared deeply at Crowley, who was standing there in the distance, revealing a pensive expression. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. Han Shuai suddenly opened his mouth, interrupting the conversation between the two. He beckoned to Crowley, who was quietly standing in the distance. When Crowley came over, he smiled and said, "We still have things to do. It's not very convenient for you to follow us. Here, take this badge and go back to Bredel City first. With this badge, nothing will happen to you in Lancelot Empire." "But Master, I don't know the way. What if I get arrested in the Dark Forest?" Crowley looked at Han Shuai timidly, appearing to be at a loss of what to do. "Head north from here and you'll reach the Valley of Sunshine in 2 days. If you have any more questions, just take this badge and tell Trunks that you're my mate. You're a dark elf, so your life won't be in danger even if you're captured. With this badge, my friends will naturally let you go, and my enemies will use you to blackmail me. In short, you won't die. Don't worry." Han Shuai comforted. After Han Shuai had been conferred the title of a Marquis, he naturally had a complete set of noble status symbols. This badge with the beautiful pattern of a sword and shield was Han Shuai's unique identity symbol. It also had a magical imprint, making it impossible for ordinary people to forge. Of course, those who had the strength to forge it would also disdain to do such a senseless thing. Crowley looked at Han Shuai anxiously. Although Han Shuai seemed amiable, his tone was firm. She knew that as a servant, she had no right to bargain. Even if Han Shuai were to kill her now, that would be her fate. Therefore, the clever Crowley could only take the badge and said meekly, "Understood, Master. I hope I'll have the chance to see you again." "Definitely," Han Shuai said with certainty. After Crowley left, Han Shuai sneered, "Playing this game with me. Those dark elves are indeed tired of living." "Brian, what's going on?" The dark dragon chief, Gilgs, had long since noticed the inkling and couldn't help but ask. "I can sense the aura of the spider goddess Lolth, whom the dark elves worship, on Crowley's body. Back then, I was nearly killed by a sneak attack. I'm afraid that the one who attacked me from behind was that so-called spider goddess Lolth. It seems that this Crowley is targeting me again," Han Shuai explained to Gilgs with a gloomy face. Gilgs was very surprised at Han Shuai's misfortune, but he didn't ask any more questions. He knew that there were some things that Han Shuai wouldn't say, so it wouldn't be appropriate for him to ask. "Let's go." Han Shuai instructed Gilbert and headed in the direction of the Cemetery of Death. After carefully weighing in his mind, Han Shuai ultimately didn't bring the dark dragons to the Cemetery of Death. Although Han Shuai believed in Gilgs, there was more than one dark dragon in the cage. Han Shuai couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't reveal the location of the Cemetery of Death at some point in the future. The Cemetery of Death was indeed shrouded in a powerful boundary. Without the skeletal staff, it was impossible to open the Cemetery of Death. However, nothing was absolute. Han Shuai naturally wouldn't think that the boundary of the Cemetery of Death was invincible. Otherwise, those evil mages who were researching necromancy magic inside wouldn't have suffered such heavy losses. Han Shuai didn't bring the dark dragons to the Cemetery of Death. Instead, he brought them into the Forest Trolls tribe and returned to the Cemetery of Death alone. All these years, The forest troll had always lived under the arrangements of Dark Dragon Gilbert. They had long since regarded Gilbert and Han Shuo as the emissary of the great goddess Dadera in the human world. The Valley of Sunshine wasn't far from the Dark Forest. When Trunks was fighting for power in the Valley of Sunshine, he had used the power of the forest troll through Gilbert. Afterwards, a good relationship had been established between the forest troll and Trunks. There was even a portion of the forest troll that directly migrated to Tanai Gorge near the Valley of Sunshine to live and work closely with Trunks. After grasping power in the Valley of Sunshine, Trunks' mercenary band grew stronger by the day. In order to take revenge, Trunks put all his energy into strengthening his own strength. With Han Shuo's support behind the scenes, Trunks had established good business relationships with various races in the underground world, including the Dark Elves and Lizard Men. These years, Trunks had obtained extremely sizable profits through the underground world transactions. Under Han Shuo's introduction, the dwarves had treated Trunks as their second good friend. Trunks had also exchanged large amounts of resources for large amounts of sharp weapons from Tanai Dwarf Mountain. With Gilbert's help, the Valley of Sunshine had a close relationship with the forest troll. Trunks provided the forest troll with weapons, armor, and food. Using his powerful intelligence network in Tanai Valley of Sunshine, he provided the forest troll with the trade routes of disobedient or disloyal caravans, allowing the forest troll to plunder them. After experiencing a cruel torture worse than death, Trunks, who wasn't a good person to begin with, had become even more ruthless and decisive. With the help of Han Shuo's Bretel City and Phoebe and Emily, Trunks had completely grasped power in the Valley of Sunshine. Trunks had tied the Soul Destroyer mercenary band, forest trolls, dwarves, lizard men of the underground world, and even Janet's bandits together. With the Valley of Sunshine and the edge of the Dark Forest as the center, he had already formed a power that no country dared to underestimate. There seemed to be lightning flashing in his slender eyes as he stared unwaveringly at Elizabeth. Suddenly, Han Shuo saw Elizabeth's face lit up with joy. Wisps of green smoke suddenly drifted out of her 7 orifices. The green smoke was like 7 earthworms wriggling in Elizabeth's nostrils, eyes, ears, and mouth. The green smoke coming and going from her 7 orifices made Elizabeth's already ugly old face look even more hideous. Master, can she do it? Gilbert was startled by the strange look on Elizabeth's face. The ones imprisoned in the Jade Frost cage were Dark Dragon Gilbert's grandfather and clansmen. He was extremely worried that Elizabeth would accidentally injure his clansmen. Han Shuo made a shushing gesture at Gilbert and slowly approached Elizabeth. He used his invisible consciousness to spy on Elizabeth and the movements within the Jade Frost cage. Han Shuo could sense that Elizabeth's unique body of divine favor had already allowed her to discover the ice and snow divine energy that existed within the Jade Frost cage. This was also the source of Elizabeth's excitement. As the green smoke lingered around Elizabeth's 7 orifices, the skin on her withered and yellow hands seemed to have shrunk and dried up severely, turning into green iron hooks. Her hands were shriveled and looked like the hands of a 1,000-year-old mummy. The skin on her bony fingers was glowing with a green, misty, evil light. Wisps of cold energy, like fine threads, slowly flowed into her body from her bony fingers. The unique structure of the body of divine favor within Elizabeth's body allowed her to endure and digest this divine energy. The sinister-looking Elizabeth's eyes were filled with excitement and joy during this process. Through the transmission of her hands, wisps of divine energy slowly flowed into her body. She could feel the benefits that the energy brought to her body. Han Shuo let out a sigh of relief, thinking that it seemed like he had made the right decision to take Elizabeth as his slave. Elizabeth, who was able to absorb this kind of divine energy, would be of great help to him. Feeling the wisps of divine energy flowing, Han Shuo pondered whether he should wait for Elizabeth to finish absorbing it before he devoured some of the energy that had been transformed in Elizabeth's body. The cold aura that had been lingering in the Jade Frost cage disappeared little by little along with Elizabeth's movements. Gilbert, who had been observing from the side, had obviously sensed the changes in the Jade Frost cage. Pleasantly surprised, Gilbert's mood became much better. When he looked at the current Elizabeth, that sinister-looking face seemed much more pleasing to the eye. Just as Han Shuo and Gilbert let out a sigh of relief, Elizabeth's face suddenly revealed a terrified expression. Her body trembled abruptly as the cold aura permeated her body. Elizabeth seemed to want to pull her hands out of the Jade Frost cage with all her might, but her hands and the Jade Frost cage seemed to be connected by a strong adhesive, unable to be separated no matter how hard she tried. At the same time, wisps of bone-chilling white smoke abruptly leaked out from the fences of the Jade Frost cage. The surrounding temperature plummeted. The originally warm forest troll tribe seemed to have fallen into a world of ice and snow. Unbeknownst to Wynne, snowflakes had unknowingly enveloped the forest troll tribe under the blowing of the chilly wind. The forest troll were immediately shivering from the cold, all of them shouting in terror. They had no idea what was happening. Han Shuo's expression changed in fright. He could distinctly feel that the Jade Frost cage seemed to have been suddenly injected with a few bursts of profound energy. These bursts of energy came in a strange manner, immediately causing the entire region to be filled with a bone-chilling coldness. It even tightly bound Elizabeth's hands, not allowing her to budge an inch. The dark dragons within the Jade Frost cage suffered the most from the bone-chilling coldness. Gilbert's grandfather Gilg's teeth were chattering, and the hot air he exhaled froze in an instant. The expressions of some of the younger dark dragons gradually stiffened. It seemed like they would be frozen soon. "Damn it, what are you doing? I'm going to kill you!" Gilbert bellowed furiously. He extended his hand and slapped at the top of Elizabeth's head. With Gilbert's strength, Elizabeth would undoubtedly die if this went on. "Stop! It's none of her business!" Han Shuo shouted and raised his hand to stop Gilbert. Gilbert was stunned by Han Shuo's shout, and when he saw Elizabeth's terrified and pained face, he finally came to his senses. However, as the dark dragons in the cage gradually stiffened, Gilbert fell into a state of irritation and restlessness. He anxiously howled, "What should I do? What should I do?" "Evacuate the clan at once," Han Shuo roared at the trembling old priest. Soon after, he summoned Fire Elite Zombie and gave him an order. In an instant, he appeared behind Elizabeth and pressed his hands on Elizabeth's shoulders at lightning speed. At the same time, in the distant territory of Kasi Empire, on the summit of an ice mountain in a world of ice and snow, many ice crystal palaces were situated on the summit of the icy mountain. At the center of one of them was a conical shrine that reached the heavens. Several experts from the Shrine of Ice, led by Ice Celestial Kori, were sitting cross-legged in a semicircle at the center of an enormous magical matrix. Each and every one of them was frozen in ice like ice sculptures. They did not seem to have any signs of life. At the center of the shrine, Ice Celestial Kori and the others all wore solemn and serene expressions. They were facing the enormous ice sculpture of the ice goddess before them. Their bodies were frozen in ice, and they maintained that posture while casting magic from afar. Dense cold air filled the entire shrine. "He has interfered." Suddenly, a loud shout came from the ice sculpture Kori. "Condense ice aura, freeze the heavens and earth." Other than Kori, the other ice sculptures simultaneously chanted in deep voices. Cold air radiated from the entire shrine, and a solemn and dignified aura pervaded the air. Thousands of miles away, Han Shuo pressed both of his hands on Elizabeth's shoulders. Surging demonic yuan suddenly poured into Elizabeth's hands from her shoulders, mixing with the bone-chilling coldness. Fire Elite Zombie, summoned by Han Shuo, emitted flaming flower buds from the fire lotus in his hand and dispersed in all directions. As soon as the flames flew out from the fire lotus, thick white smoke suddenly appeared in the world of ice and snow. That was the smoke produced by the combination of scorching heat and cold air. When Fire Elite Zombie appeared with the fire lotus in his hand, the dancing flames finally stopped the sudden drop in temperature of the entire forest troll tribe. Only then did the forest troll, who were frozen to the point that it was difficult for them to even walk, noticeably speed up their escape. Inside the Jade Frost cage, with the assistance of Fire Elite Zombie's fire lotus, the ice rapidly melted into water. It was only at this moment that Gilg's grinding teeth could be heard. Han Shua's two hands that were pressed on Elizabeth's shoulders were fully activated with the mystical glacial spell flame. Surging demonic yuan rapidly poured into Elizabeth's palms, forming a scorching high temperature that helped Elizabeth resist the invasion of the cold air inside the cage. Han Shua shuddered. Through the cold air that erupted from Elizabeth's palms, he sensed the divine energy that Ice Celestial Kori had unleashed a few days ago. Han Shua was almost certain that the anomaly of the Jade Frost cage must have something to do with Ice Celestial Kori. Han Shua understood that this Jade Frost cage, blessed by the Ice Goddess, must have some kind of miraculous function that allowed Ice Celestial Kori and the others to directly communicate with each other. It seemed that he had fallen into Ice Celestial Kori's trap this time. When Ice Celestial Kori rapidly left the Valley of the Dark Dragons and did not pay attention to the disappearance of the Jade Frost cage, he had long planned to use the Jade Frost cage to scheme against him. Cursing Ice Celestial Kori's treachery and viciousness in his heart, the endless demonic yuan in Han Shua's body frantically transformed into scorching red flames through the mystical glacial spell flame, doing his utmost to help Elizabeth resist the invasion of the cold air inside the Jade Frost cage. It wasn't that Han Shua cared about Elizabeth's life or death, but that even if Elizabeth were to die at this moment, the cold air inside the Jade Frost cage would not vanish. Furthermore, using Elizabeth's unique body to prevent the cold air from leaking out was at least safer than Han Shua using his own body as a battlefield. Cold. So cold. With the infusion of Han Shua's demonic yuan, Elizabeth was finally able to speak while trembling. "Hold on." Han Shua coldly groaned. Discarding all distracting thoughts, he knitted his brows and strenuously held on. As the temperature rapidly plummeted, some of the old, weak, and young forest troll froze to death before they could even be roasted by fire elite zombies' flames. The entire forest troll tribe was shrouded in panic. Under the old priest's loud roars, all the young and strong forest troll fled in panic towards the outskirts of the tribe. Just like Han Shua, Fire Elite Zombie continued to release flames from the Fire Lotus, bitterly holding on. Among them, Gilbert had the most free time. However, the one who was the most fearful and uneasy was none other than Gilbert. Standing beside Fire Elite Zombie, although Gilbert was also shivering from the cold, he could still hold on. Looking at the miserable state of his tribesmen inside the Jade Frost cage, Gilbert understood that once Fire Elite Zombie and Han Shua could no longer hold on, his tribesmen would face the fate of being frozen to death. This made Gilbert as anxious as fire. Unfortunately, he couldn't intervene. All he could do was stare fixedly at the Jade Frost cage from the side, hating the Shrine of Ice to the bone. "Father, this won't do." Suddenly, Fire Elite Zombie transmitted to Han Shua. The cold air inside the Jade Frost cage grew stronger and stronger. Han Shua also gradually began to feel weak. He understood that what Fire Elite Zombie said was not false. Just as Han Shua was at a loss as to what to do, Fire Elite Zombie continued, "Father, let's move the battle to my birthplace. I have a way. The place of extreme fire." Upon hearing Fire Elite Zombie's words, Han Shua's eyes lit up. Chapter 474. As they were both in the dark forest, the Forest Troll tribe wasn't far from the place of extreme fire. With Fire Elite Zombie's suggestion, Han Shua immediately got to work. "Gilbert, transform into a dragon." Han Shua shouted at the anxious dark dragon. Without the slightest hesitation, Gilbert let out a dragon roar towards the sky and suddenly soared into the sky. His human body expanded at a high speed, and in the blink of an eye, he had become a thick black dragon that was 30 meters long. Elizabeth's hands were glued to the Jade Frost cage. Han Shua grabbed Elizabeth's shoulders and soared into the sky, flying along with Elizabeth and the Jade Frost cage. Gilbert's wriggling dragon spine dived downwards, just in time to carry Han Shua on his back. Phew! Cold. So cold. When Han Shua landed on Gilbert's spine with Elizabeth and the Jade Frost cage, the Jade Frost cage followed suit and landed on Gilbert's back. The cold energy naturally flowed into Gilbert's body, immediately causing him to shiver from the cold. Han Shuo creased his brows. Then, he exerted force with both hands and lifted Elizabeth into the air. The jade frost cage that Elizabeth was glued to was also suspended high in the air. This way, Han Shuo had to expend some demonic yuan, but it ensured that Gilbert's body wouldn't come into direct contact with the jade frost cage. Fly at a low altitude and let Fire Elite Zombie come up. Then, immediately fly to the area where we encountered the Lord of the Flames. Han Shuo lifted Elizabeth and the jade frost cage high up and instructed Gilbert in a deep voice. Understood. The dark dragon circled in the air and suddenly descended, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold wind that blew the layer of snow on the ground into the air like dust. The Fire Elite Zombie, who had long been prepared, suddenly shot high into the sky after a dash and steadily landed on Dark Dragon Gilbert's back. He walked 2 steps to the jade frost cage and continuously released flames into the cage, warming up the dark dragons whose bodies were starting to freeze again. When everything was ready, Dark Dragon Gilbert identified the direction and flew towards the place of extreme fire as fast as he could. On Gilbert's body, Han Shuo lowered his head and glanced at him. He discovered that the forest troll tribe below was filled with a fierce and cold aura. A few small ponds that served as a water source had been frozen solid. All the forest trolls' faces were filled with terror. They trembled as they tried their best to escape from this world of ice and snow. Many of the forest troll warriors were still carrying frozen children in their arms, letting out mournful wails. Some of the older forest trolls' frail bodies were like popsicles, without the slightest trace of life. Their bodies didn't allow them to wait for the Fire Elite Zombie to rescue them, as they left this world forever. Looking at the hundreds of dead forest troll, Han Shuo's heart was filled with remorse. He knew that this disaster of the forest troll was single-handedly caused by him. Most of the forest trolls that had served him loyally for several years, including the old, young, sick, and disabled, had lost their lives to the frost this time. Shrine of Ice, this enmity is absolutely irreconcilable. Han Shuo faced the sky and howled in rage. The demonic yuan in his body flowed unceasingly into Elizabeth's arm, transforming into scorching energy to resist the invasion of the cold. The distance from the forest troll tribe to the place of extreme fire wasn't far. But it was this distance that Han Shuo and Fire Elite Zombie felt incomparably long. Han Shuo's demonic yuan was incomparably vast, and he could still manage to hold on. However, Fire Elite Zombie was already showing signs of fatigue. Han Shuo could tell from the flickering red light of the Fire Lotus. As a treasure nurtured in the place of extreme fire, the Fire Lotus contained incomparably vast energy of fire. As long as Fire Elite Zombie's physical strength could hold on, theoretically, he could always borrow the energy contained within the Fire Lotus. However, Fire Elite Zombie had not been born for long. Given his current strength, it wasn't easy for him to hold on until now. Most importantly, this time, the Fire Elite Zombie was resisting the power of extreme cold from frigid ice. As the saying goes, ice and fire are incompatible. When Fire Elite Zombie was resisting the energy of extreme cold, he had to expend a lot more energy. In addition to the Jade Frost cage being invaded by the cold air of several experts from the Shrine of Ice, he was able to show signs of fatigue so quickly. Thousands of miles away, inside the Shrine of Ice, the group of experts from the Shrine of Ice, led by Ice Celestial Corey, appeared unruffled, especially Ice Celestial Corey. His face even revealed an ice-cold smile as though victory was in his grasp. It seemed that he was very satisfied with his operation this time. Humph! A puny city lord like him dares to make an enemy of our Shrine of Ice. Corey, who was trapped in the ice, had long understood Han Shuo's identity. Sneering in his heart, Ice Celestial Corey said in a deep voice with extreme confidence, "In just a moment, we will freeze them all to death. Everyone, hold on. Rest assured, Lord Corey. With our combined strength, they will be dead for sure." Lord Corey's calculations are truly accurate. This time, that Brian won't be able to escape. When he dies from being frozen into an ice sculpture, the Church of Light will surely be very grateful for our help. Another sacred magus also found the time to speak and took the opportunity to flatter Ice Celestial Corey. We don't need the Church of Light's gratitude. Humph. Our Shrine of Ice should be the #1 religion on the continent. By killing this Brian that they can't do anything to, we can prove it to them. Corey coldly groaned. Lord Corey is absolutely right. Our Shrine of Ice, as the divine emissaries of the Ice Goddess on Profound Continent, shouldn't be suppressed by the Church of Light forever. That person hastily corrected himself. All right, let's put in more effort and freeze them to death in one spurt of energy. Corey did not continue with superfluous words and immediately shouted. Soon after, cold air pervaded the air around them. Strands of bone-chilling coldness were transmitted through the abstruse magical matrix to the dark forest thousands of miles away. Father, I can't hold on much longer. Fire Elite Zombie, who was incessantly spurring the flames within the Fire Lotus, suddenly transmitted a message to Han Shuo. Han Shuo immediately sensed the sudden surge of cold air within the Jade Frost cage. Han Shuo, who was constantly pouring demonic yuan into Elizabeth's hands, found it increasingly difficult to resist. By this time, the radiance of the flames within the Fire Lotus was no longer as bright as before. The yuan energy of fire within the corpse of fire armor was gradually draining away and was on the verge of drying up. Elizabeth's hands were frozen to a greenish-purple color. Her body of divine favor simply couldn't withstand the onslaught of such enormous cold energy. The few cyclones in her body also slowly stopped transforming energy, and now they were only halfway through their journey. With Dark Dragon Gilbert's speed, it would take them another 10 minutes or so to reach the place of extreme fire. At this rate, Fire Elite Zombie would be severely injured, and Elizabeth and the Dark Dragon in the cage would all freeze to death before they could reach the place of extreme fire. At this moment, Han Shuo was extremely anxious. Unfortunately, he was also having a hard time resisting the cold and had absolutely no time to help either side. If Han Shuo were to fully deploy the art of the demonic ninth heavens, his speed would be much faster than Dark Dragon Gilbert's. Unfortunately, he had to lift the Jade Frost cage high and constantly use demonic yuan to resist the cold air's onslaught. He had no time to help. His heart was filled with frustration. Han Shuo's mind raced, but he couldn't think of any other way. Gilbert, hurry up. If you can't reach the place of extreme fire in 5 minutes, your grandfather and your clan will all perish because of you. Han Shuo was at his wit's end and could only tell Gilbert the truth about the current situation. Han Shuo had already made up his mind. If he really couldn't do it, he could only sever Elizabeth's hands and give up on the Dark Dragon clan. Although he was unwilling to do so, he really couldn't think of any other way. As soon as Han Shuo's words fell, Gilbert suddenly let out a mournful howl. Following Gilbert's howl, the blood vessels in his dragon body suddenly ruptured. Fresh blood dripped down from Gilbert's body like a fine rain. At the same time, Gilbert's speed, which was already faster than lightning, suddenly doubled. He streaked across the blue dome of heaven like a black bolt of lightning, flying straight towards the place of extreme fire. No. Inside the cage, Gilgs, the patriarch of the Dark Dragons, was shivering from the cold. He suddenly let out a loud shout while shivering. He twisted his body with all his might, grabbed the bone-chilling bars with both hands, and yelled desperately, "Little bastard, stop it! Stop it! We can't be saved. You are the only hope of the Dark Dragons. You can't die." As Gilbert's master, Han Shuo could clearly feel the loss of Gilbert's life force. Listening to his grandfather Gilg's hoarse roar, Han Shuo knew what Gilbert was doing, using his life force to stimulate all the hidden potential of the Dragon Clan to save the entire Dark Dragon Clan. "Gilbert, stop!" Han Shuo suddenly shouted. The relationship between Elizabeth and the Dark Dragons was far from being as deep as the relationship between Han Shuo and Gilbert. Han Shuo could watch a dozen Dark Dragons freeze to death, and he could chop off Elizabeth's hands without hesitation, but he couldn't watch Gilbert overdraft his life force and die. However, Dark Dragon Gilbert turned a deaf ear to Gilg's hoarse roar and Han Shuo's shouts. He only flew at full speed towards the place of extreme fire. In Gilbert's lantern-sized eyes, There was only the firmness of facing death with equanimity. Gilbert, if you don't stop, I'll leave this matter to you right now. Han Shuo could clearly feel the loss of Gilbert's life force. Furious, he stomped on Gilbert's dragon body and shouted in grief, "Master, I beg you to fulfill my wish." Gilbert's enormous dragon body shuddered. Feeling Han Shuo's rage, he finally opened his mouth to speak. His deep voice was no longer frivolous, only heavy and resolute. After a pause, he continued in a low voice, "Master, it is my, Gilbert's, honor to be able to follow you. All these years, I've been very happy with you, really. Goodbye, Master. I, Gilbert, will never forget the fun and joy I had with you, even if I die." As he flew at high speed, Gilbert's life force was rapidly draining away bit by bit, accompanied by his deep voice. Han Shuo understood that Gilbert was saving the dark dragons at the cost of his own life. His request was so firm that Han Shuo couldn't refuse. Although Han Shuo could feel the loss of Gilbert's life force, he felt an indescribable grief in his heart. He wished he could immediately chop off Elizabeth's hands and abandon the life of the dark dragons. However, he knew that he couldn't refuse Gilbert's wish. Thus, Han Shuo didn't stop Gilbert. Hearing Gilbert's deep voice of farewell, scenes after scenes replayed in Han Shuo's mind. Don't hesitate. Think about it. If I become your servant, I can help you kill and set fires, carry you everywhere, and help you deal with others. As the master, you only need to give me treasures and beauties to enjoy. What a good deal this is. If you don't have treasures, I can make do, but I must have beauties to sleep with me. Otherwise, I won't do it. When he first met Gilbert, before he became Han Shuo's magical pet, he had made a hilarious request, "My great, heroic, magical, and noble master. What do you want? Don't tell me you're planning to lay your hands on your most adorable, loyal, honest, and humble Gilbert?" No, never. I can't deal with my master together with you, not even if I die." In the Forbidden Land, facing the possessed Han Shuo, Gilbert stood there in a daze, not knowing what to do. He stared blankly at Han Shuo, waiting foolishly for Han Shuo's 100-meter-long sword ray to bombard him. Scenes after scenes repeatedly appeared in Han Shuo's mind. At this moment, Han Shuo recalled all the bits and pieces of his interactions with Dark Dragon Gilbert. Unknowingly, Han Shuo's eyes were already brimming with tears. No. The Dark Dragon Chief, Gilgs, let out a long howl and fainted on the ground in grief. Beside Gilgs, the remaining Dark Dragons looked at Gilbert, dumbfounded. They recalled the bad little dragon who had been causing trouble in Tanai's territory, destroying Tanai's tranquility, and making noises about running away from home. And now, when they looked at Gilbert, who had sacrificed himself for his clansmen, they couldn't seem to connect the two. Finally, with Gilbert's life as the price, before the Fire Elite zombie had exhausted all of its energy, Gilbert's enormous body, drenched in blood, had already descended on the mountain valley where the place of extreme fire was located. It was also at this moment that Han Shuo realized that Gilbert was truly beyond redemption. All of his life force had been drained away in the process. "Grandpa, live on well. Master, thank you. I will always remember you." As Gilbert collapsed on the mountain, Tanai uttered these last words. His enormous dragon head no longer had the strength to lift, and not a trace of life could be sensed from his body. Han Shuo's eyes were brimming with tears. Standing on his dragon body, Gilbert's last words lingered in his ears. His mind was filled with bits and pieces of his time with Gilbert. "Father, keep his soul." At this moment, Little Skull's anxious message suddenly came from the distant netherworld. Chapter 475. With Little Skull's reminder, Han Shuo immediately reacted. He hastily stabilized his state of mind and focused his consciousness on sensing. He instantly sensed Gilbert's soul that had yet to disperse. The Demon's Lair edge in Han Shuo's body suddenly flew out. An extremely strong suction force was generated. Gilbert's soul that had yet to disperse was drawn by the Demon's Lair edge and flowed into the Demon's Lair edge in a split second. Although the Demon's Lair Edge couldn't help Han Shuo in battle for the time being, absorbing a soul wasn't a big deal. As the owner of the Demon's Lair Edge, Han Shuo could even open up a separate area within the Demon's Lair Edge for Gilbert to hide in. Little Skull's reminder dispelled Han Shuo's sorrow. He suddenly recalled that the demonic arts and necromancy magic he practiced were both evil arts despised by righteous people. Whether it was demonic arts or necromancy magic, they were extremely familiar and proficient with souls. Han Shuo's mind only spun for a moment before he discovered that whether it was demonic arts or necromancy magic, he could make use of Gilbert's powerful soul to rebuild his body and revive him. As long as his soul remained, Gilbert wouldn't be considered to have completely vanished. With that, the sorrow Han Shuo felt from Gilbert naturally faded by a lot. After the Demon's Lair Edge returned to Han Shuo's body, he took a look at Fire Elite Zombie and discovered that Fire Elite Zombie was already at the end of his rope. He immediately knew that he couldn't hesitate any longer. The cold air within the Jade Frost cage was as chilly as ever. By now, Han Shuo had already lost 2/3 of the surging demonic yuan in his body. However, judging from the energy transmitted from the Jade Frost cage, it seemed to be endless. This made Han Shuo realize that his opponent was indeed a cut above him in terms of endurance. Go! Han Shuo shouted and descended towards a crack in the magma of Mountain Tanai. Before Han Shuo could approach the crack in the magma, the entire Tanai mountain suddenly trembled. The scorching temperature continued to rise, and thick magma shot out like a fountain. A strong feeling of longing suddenly filled the entire valley. It was like a mother who had bitterly watched over her child for many years and suddenly found her son standing in front of the door. She knows that I'm back. Fire Elite Zombie immediately transmitted to Han Shuo, pleasantly surprised. Han Shuo finally arrived at the mouth of the lava fissure. He activated his protective shield and enveloped Elizabeth before descending. As the refiner of the Fire Elite Zombie, Han Shuo could clearly sense the exchange between the Fire Elite Zombie and the Lord of the Flames. As soon as the Fire Elite Zombie arrived in this area, the surrounding temperature continued to rise and the Fire Elite Zombie's exhausted energy began to recover bit by bit. Raging flames shot out in all directions. The place of extreme fire was bubbling with fire bubbles, and a terrifyingly high temperature filled all directions. Suddenly, a roar sounded from the place of extreme fire. Han Shuo lowered his head to take a look and discovered that the enormous body of the Lord of the Flames was slowly emerging from the place of extreme fire. On the surrounding cliffs of the place of extreme fire, many flame demon warriors had surged out of nowhere. Each and every one of them was looking at Han Shuo and his party that were slowly descending. "Father, don't worry, she will help me." Fire Elite Zombie hastily transmitted to Han Shuo when he sensed Han Shuo's vigilance. "All right, I'll count on you." Han Shuo naturally had absolute trust in Fire Elite Zombie. Upon hearing Fire Elite Zombie's assurance that nothing would go wrong, he immediately felt at ease. While Han Shuo was speaking, Fire Elite Zombie held the Fire Lotus in his hand and suddenly landed on the enormous Lord of the Flames that had emerged from the place of extreme fire. Fire Elite Zombie sat on the broad shoulders of the Lord of the Flames. Endless energy was suddenly released from the Lord of the Flames' body. A dozen or so streams of magma were directly spat out from its mouth. Like fiery red silk, they all wrapped around the Jade Frost cage. At the same time, the place of extreme fire that had existed for an unknown number of years and had nurtured the fire attribute treasure, the Fire Lotus, suddenly seemed to come alive. Thousands and thousands of strands of the Yuan energy of fire flowed into the Fire Elite Zombie's body. The previously exhausted Fire Elite Zombie instantly recovered the strength he had lost. The Fire Lotus suddenly glowed brightly. Under Fire Elite Zombie's manipulation, the enormous Yuan energy of fire in the place of extreme fire was mobilized. Blobs of bowl-sized flames flew and danced on the Jade Frost cage. Han Shuo suddenly felt the pressure on him greatly reduced. With the bone-chilling Jade Frost cage being manipulated by Fire Elite Zombie and the Lord of the Flames, the bone-chilling coldness was all used to resist the counterattack of the flames. Han Shuo no longer needed to expend too much demonic arts to continue resisting. Even the bodies of Elizabeth and the dark dragons that were on the verge of freezing had returned to normal under the high temperature of the place of extreme fire. Thousands of miles away, at the Shrine of Ice. Oh no, there's an extremely powerful energy of fire pouring in. What's going on? That sacred magus who had been sucking up to ice celestial Corey suddenly cried out in alarm. Inside the Shrine of Ice, every expert wore a solemn expression. Their previously unruffled composure had vanished without a trace. Without exception, all of their gazes were cast on their leader, Ice Celestial Corey. Ice Celestial Corey was also astonished. Evidently, he had also sensed the change in the Jade Frost cage in the dark forest through some mysterious connection. That energy that had suddenly deepened revealed the most scorching energy of flames. For the Shrine of Ice, this kind of firepower was what they loathed the most, and also the most troublesome to deal with. The appearance of this energy that had suddenly become incomparably powerful completely disrupted Ice Celestial Corey's composure. Under the attentive gazes of his subordinates, Corey rapidly racked his brains for countermeasures, trying to determine the source of the energy of flames that had suddenly appeared. After a long while, Corey suddenly opened his mouth and said, "This must be their counterattack before their death. As long as we resist this wave of attacks with all our might, they will no longer have any ability to resist." Lord Corey, if it wasn't for their counterattack before their death, if we were to use all our might to resist this wave of attacks, just in case, and I'm saying just in case, their strength surpasses our combined strength, it would be very difficult for us to withdraw, another sacred magus of the Shrine of Ice suddenly reminded. Ice Celestial Corey let out a cold groan and said, "My judgment won't be wrong. Even if it's another force. With so many experts of our Shrine of Ice joining forces, how many on profound continent can withstand it? Don't worry, this time I will go all out. I will freeze them all to death in one fell swoop." Seeing that Ice Celestial Corey was somewhat displeased, the few of them no longer said anything. Corey's conceit was well known in the Shrine of Ice. He wasn't a person who would listen to the opinions of others. Once he had made a decision, all one needed to do was to act according to his requirements. There was no need to question whether his decision was correct or not. Under Corey's command, the strongest few members of the Shrine of Ice, using the Jade Frost cage blessed by the Ice Goddess, began to unleash the divine energy in their bodies with all their might in accordance with the effects of the abstruse magical matrix, intending to defeat and eliminate Han Shuo and his party in the faraway place of extreme fire in one fell swoop. The dark forest, the place of extreme fire. "Master, what should I do? What should I do?" Elizabeth, who was finally able to speak, cried out in panic. "Maintain this state and don't talk nonsense. This time, we won't be the ones having a headache." Han Shuo lightly shouted, and soon after, he no longer paid any attention to Elizabeth. The endless yuan energy of fire in the place of extreme fire poured into the Jade Frost cage through the two existences, the Fire Elite Zombie and the Lord of the Flames. The scorching heat flooded the entire region. After Gilgs, the leader of the Dark Dragons, fainted, he actually slowly regained consciousness from the high temperature. "Silly boy. Where's that silly boy Gilbert? Where's my grandson?" As soon as Gilgs woke up, he anxiously searched for Gilbert's existence everywhere. "Patriarch, Gilbert. He's already dead," a dark dragon said with a pained sigh, his eyes brimming with tears. "Roar!" Gilgs let out a mournful howl as grief attacked his heart. It was at this moment that those in the distant Shrine of Ice launched a fierce counterattack. The frigid cold air increased by 3 times. The frigid air within the Jade Frost cage overflowed in all directions. When it came into contact with the high temperature of the place of extreme fire, thick smoke was produced in an instant, shrouding Gilgs and the others. The frigid cold current, like a breached dam, madly gushed into Elizabeth's body through her hands. Han Shuo was startled. He thought to himself, "Here it comes." He hastily concentrated all of his attention, madly attacking Elizabeth's hands with his remaining demonic yuan. "Arg, it hurts." Elizabeth let out a miserable shriek, like a pig being slaughtered. Red, white, and green radiances radiated from her hands. One moment, it was frigid, The next, it was scorching. The two energies collided with each other, bringing her a pain she had never experienced before. Previously, when Elizabeth's body was frozen stiff due to the frigid cold had also frozen her body. The pain was actually not that unbearable. However, now that she could move her body, the pain became even more distinct and frightening. At this moment, Han Shuo couldn't be bothered with Elizabeth at all. He constantly poured his demonic yuan and condensed it into flames on Elizabeth's hands. Suddenly, his consciousness sensed something through the Jade Frost cage. From within the Jade Frost cage, after concentrating his consciousness, Han Shuo seemed to be able to sense a few auras from extremely far away. It was as though there was some kind of miraculous connection that bound the Jade Frost cage to some kind of distant energy. Han Shuo suddenly came to a realization. The auras on the Jade Frost cage that his consciousness could sense should be traces of the souls of Ice, Celestial Corey, and his gang. If they wanted to transmit their energy to the Jade Frost cage through that mysterious method, their mental strength must be highly concentrated. In this way, through that mysterious connection, Han Shuo's powerful consciousness could also somewhat sense it. While Han Shuo was attentively comprehending, the Jade Frost cage once again erupted with 10 times the frigid coldness. Thick smoke enveloped the entire sky above the place of extreme fire. Even the fire-like threads spat out by the Lord of the Flames were rapidly freezing up. It seemed that the Lord of the Flames had never encountered such a thorny situation. Irritated, she suddenly raised her head and roared. The entire valley, including the place of extreme fire, seemed to be shaking along with her roar. All of a sudden, the bubbles rising from the magma in the place of extreme fire popped one after another. It was as though the Lord of the Flames was retaliating in anger. The yuan energy of fire that had been nurtured in the place of extreme fire for 10,000 years gathered densely within the bubbles and flowed towards the Jade Frost cage through the fiery threads spat out by the Lord of the Flames. The Fire Elite Zombie jumped right into the place of extreme fire. In an instant, the Fire Lotus in his hand absorbed the terrifying energy of the place of extreme fire. Instead of releasing flames one by one, the Fire Elite Zombie hurled it towards the Jade Frost cage with boundless energy of fire. "Father, be careful," the Fire Elite Zombie transmitted. Han Shuo understood that the battle had reached its most critical moment. He was fully focused. The formidable consciousness that had been deliberately hiding from the six-horned tribal king of the soul race no longer had any misgivings. It unfolded and firmly locked onto the soul attached to the Jade Frost cage. "Hold on. They are all done for." Ice Celestial Corey shouted from the distant shrine of ice. Everyone gave it their all. The divine energy that they had exchanged for years of devotion to the ice goddess surged towards the Jade Frost cage in the distance like wild horses out of control. Rumble, the Fire Lotus bombarded on the Jade Frost cage. Terrifying explosions were heard. One after another, fiery flames leaped out from the Fire Lotus and attached themselves to the bars. The bodies of many dark dragons inside the Jade Frost cage shook violently. That young lady even vomited a large mouthful of blood. It seemed that she had been injured. After the Lord of the Flames exerted her full strength, the fiery threads connected to the Jade Frost cage madly gushed out endless energy. Looking at the Jade Frost cage again, white smoke spread in all directions. "So powerful. Lord Corey, we can't hold on any longer." The sacred magus who had been praising Corey suddenly shouted in alarm. Under the joint efforts of Fire Elite Zombie and the Lord of the Flames, utilizing the energy accumulated in the place of extreme fire for millions of years, the Shrine of Ice and the Jade Frost cage were completely routed. From Y. Elizabeth's two hands, Han Shuo understood that Ice Celestial Corey and his party could no longer hold on. Han Shuo's consciousness could even sense that the few presences that had been shrouding the Jade Frost cage were gradually leaving. It was at this moment that Han Shuo, who had been waiting all along, suddenly made his move. While they were frantically defending against the counterattack of the flames, all of Han Shuo's mental strength, including his consciousness, attacked those few presences like sharp swords. PFFF, all the experts in the Shrine of Ice, including Ice Celestial Corey, violently vomited a mouthful of blood. Their souls felt as though they were being sliced by 1,000 blades. With that, they no longer had the slightest ability to resist. The Jade Frost cage shattered with a loud bang. Not a shred of frigid energy could be sensed in the place of extreme fire. Elizabeth's 2 hands were freed. Han Shuo casually grabbed her. Although the dark dragons had yet to fully recover their strength, they were still able to hover in the air. Not a single one of them fell into the place of extreme fire. Thousands of miles away, in the Shrine of Ice, the Ison Kori and the others, who were like ice sculptures, exploded one after another. Even Ice Celestial Kori's body was flung far away, his blood splattering all over the ground. The Shrine of Ice, which had been shrouded in frigid ice all year round, suddenly experienced a surge of heat. This tall and majestic shrine, constructed from ice crystals, actually began to melt gradually. The disciples of the Ice Celestial Condor sect who were practicing their martial arts and water magic in the Shrine of Ice suddenly felt a high temperature that they instinctively loathed and feared. Each and every one of them frowned in fright as they searched for the source of the high temperature. Then, they discovered that the largest shrine dedicated to the statue of the ice goddess was actually slowly melting. This was something that had never happened in 1,000 years. In the Shrine of Ice, such a phenomenon was even more terrifying than the descent of demons. Everyone was panic-stricken, not understanding what was happening. Could it be that the ice goddess had already abandoned them? As the Shrine of Ice sank into a panic that it had never experienced in 1,000 years, Han Shuo suddenly exhaled softly. Then, Han Shuo was taken aback. He gazed at the Lord of the Flames in the place of extreme fire below in disbelief. He saw that the colossal Lord of the Flames, whose body was forged from magma and iron, was undergoing an astonishing transformation. Rocks as red as soldering iron were shaken off one after another as the Lord of the Flames roared. An incomparably tremendous energy was erupting from the Lord of the Flames' body. Gradually, the Lord of the Flames' incomparably large body swayed and suddenly became even larger. The magma of the entire place of extreme fire poured onto her body like a fountain, as if providing her with the enormous energy that the place of extreme fire had accumulated for millions of years. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the Lord of the Flames first grew madly. Her colossal body nearly filled the entire place of extreme fire. After a while, the rocks on her body shook off rapidly. Under the irrigation of the magma, her body began to shrink bit by bit. Han Shuo stared at the Lord of the Flames without blinking. He could feel that the strength of her body was becoming more and more tyrannical as her body shrank. Soon after, streaks of fiery light burst out from her body. She was like a miniature sun, so glaring that one could not even open their eyes. Oh haha, I've finally evolved. I've finally evolved. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the Lord of the Flames, who was emitting dazzling red light, laughed wildly. Gradually, the red light dissipated. A fat, middle-aged woman with red skin appeared before Han Shuo. Due to the presence of the Yuan energy of Fire, Fire Elite Zombie had acknowledged the Emperor of the Flames as his mother and indeed treated her as his own. However, back then, Han Shuo didn't treat Fire Elite Zombie as his own child, and Fire Elite Zombie had never addressed Han Shuo as his father. By now, Han Shuo had unknowingly long since regarded Fire Elite Zombie as his own child. He had also become accustomed to Fire Elite Zombie addressing him as father. However, now that Fire Elite Zombie addressed the Emperor of the Flames as mother and Han Shuo as father, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the fat middle-aged woman before him, the Emperor of the Flames. Han Shuo's scalp went numb. He blinked his eyes as he watched Fire Elite Zombie communicate with the Emperor of the Flames. Hearing Fire Elite Zombie address the Emperor of the Flames as mother over and over again, Han Shuo couldn't help but imagine some rather terrifying scenes in his mind. Too terrifying. Han Shuo thought of something, and his complexion turned incomparably ugly. Hey, kid, are you the father of my child? Just as Han Shuo was letting his imagination run wild, the fat middle-aged woman suddenly shouted at Han Shuo, "Are you the father of my child?" Han Shua shivered when he heard the fat woman's words. He squeezed out a smile that was uglier than crying and hastily replied, "No, you and I didn't give birth to him." Han Shua really wanted to slap himself as soon as the words left his mouth. The more panicked he was, the more incoherent his speech became. His complexion became uglier and uglier. This was an embarrassment he hadn't felt for many years. "Nonsense. Of course I know he's not the child of you and I." The Emperor of the Flames casually reprimanded Han Shua. She really did look like a shrewish woman. She did not show the slightest bit of embarrassment. She then added, "Besides, it's not like I can give birth." It's even more impossible for you to give birth to him." "Father, my mother can now transform into human form. She wants to leave this place and experience the outside world." Fire Elite Zombie transmitted to Han Shua. Then, sensing Han Shua's chaotic state of mind, he asked with concern, "Father, what's wrong? Why are you so flustered?" "No, it's nothing," Han Shua hastily replied. Ever since I found out about this great place, I have been staying here to accumulate energy and evolve. I don't even know how many years have passed. Now that I can finally transform into human form, I plan to experience the outside world." The fat woman, the Emperor of the Flames, said to Han Shua, "Oh, that's good. The world of humans is indeed very interesting. With your current appearance, most people would definitely not treat you as an anomaly. With your valiant strength, you can go anywhere on profound continent," Han Shua replied, echoing the Emperor of the Flames' words. Suddenly, Han Shua was startled. It was only then that he recalled the terrifying strength of the Emperor of the Flames. Disregarding the fact that Fire Elite Zombie called her father and mother, the Emperor of the Flames with demigod strength would never become enemies with Han Shua due to the existence of Fire Elite Zombie. If Han Shua could use the Emperor of the Flames' strength to aid him, it would undoubtedly be an extremely powerful aid. Therefore, as soon as Han Shua finished speaking, before the Emperor of the Flames could reply, Han Shua hastily invited, "I'm familiar with the human world. Since you don't have a goal, why don't you come to our Lancelot Empire and see what's the difference between the human world and the world of magical beasts?" "Sure, since I don't have a goal, I'll just walk around. It's the same wherever I go." To Han Shua's surprise, the fat woman very straightforwardly agreed to Han Shua's suggestion. After thinking for a moment, she grabbed Fire Elite Zombie and said to Han Shua, "Let's go. Let's go up first." All right, Han Shua replied. He took a glance at the dark dragons who were similarly stupefied as they stared at the Emperor of the Flames below, and said, Let's go to the top of the valley first, then we'll talk about other matters." "Brian, that bastard Gilbert, is he already dead?" Gilgs, the patriarch of the dark dragons, had his strength returned little by little after breaking free. Having reached the 4th level, he could completely adapt to the high temperature here without the slightest bit of discomfort. It was just that there was a perpetual pain hanging on his face. Upon hearing Gilbert mentioned, Han Shua couldn't help but feel sorrow in his heart. However, compared to before, having found a way to deal with the situation, his sorrow wasn't as intense as before. Han Shua forced a smile at Gilgs and consoled, "Don't worry. Although Gilbert is dead, his soul has been collected by me. Give me some time, and I will bring him back to life in front of you." After a short pause, Han Shua's eyes glittered with cold lightning as he said in a deep voice, "In addition, Gilbert's sacrifice will not be in vain. I will make the Shrine of Ice pay 10 times, 100 times the price." Really? You can bring Gilbert back to life?" The patriarch of the Dark Dragons asked in a slightly trembling voice as he looked at Han Shua in disbelief. Nodding his head, Han Shua was about to give a complete guarantee. However, on second thought, whether it was demonic arts or necromancy magic, the resurrected Gilbert would never be the same as before. Thinking of this, Han Shua couldn't help but sigh and say, "I can guarantee that Gilbert can come back to life. It's just that his new body might have some changes." Gilgs naturally wasn't an ordinary person. He obviously understood the meaning behind Han Shua's words. He couldn't help but sigh and say, "As long as he can be resurrected, nothing else matters." Let's go, let's go. You've lived for thousands of years, yet you're as long-winded as a woman. While Han Shuo and Gilgs were still sighing with emotion, the fat woman, the Emperor of the Flames, couldn't help but urge them. She had never roamed the continent as a human before. Now that she had finally evolved to the 5th level of the Emperor realm, she couldn't wait any longer. Without saying anything else, Han Shuo nodded at Gilgs and flew out of the lava crevice. When he arrived at the valley where the place of extreme fire was located, Han Shuo gazed at the group of non-human creatures. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. We must avenge Gilbert. From today onwards, the Shrine of Ice will be the irreconcilable enemy of our Dark Dragon clan. A boorish dark dragon with the appearance of a burly man immediately roared in grief and indignation when he saw Gilbert's corpse lying in a pool of blood upon arriving at the valley. After the thrilling battle in the valley just now, the lava from the place of extreme fire shot out in all directions, causing another volcanic eruption in the small valley. The magma, which contained the enormous fire origin energy of the place of extreme fire, submerged Gilbert's corpse. Gilbert's lifeless corpse was burned by the magma, and his skin and flesh were all melted away by the magma. All that was left was a huge skeleton, a magical beast core, and 2 eyeballs. Looking at Gilbert's corpse, even though Han Shuo had a way to save Gilbert, he still couldn't restrain his anger. At once, he faced the sky and bellowed, "That's right, we must avenge him." By this time, the Patriarch of Dark Dragons, Gilgs, had flown to where Gilbert's corpse was. He carefully stored away Gilbert's magical beast core and 2 eyeballs. After letting out a furious howl, Han Shuo summoned Earth Elite Zombie. Under the effect of Earth Elite Zombie, Dark Dragon Gilbert's enormous skeleton was buried deep in the earth, ready to be used when Gilbert's body was reconstructed in the future. "I want to go to human society," the Emperor of the Flames said resolutely and decisively as he looked at Han Shuo. Just as Han Shuo was about to agree, his consciousness suddenly sensed the boundless hatred coming from Tarag Canyon. Han Shuo was startled. He immediately realized that the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race had discovered his whereabouts when he released his consciousness to deal with the Shrine of Ice. Alarmed, Han Shuo immediately concealed his consciousness. Suddenly, a thought leaped into Han Shuo's mind. Han Shuo's eyes sparkled. After a short while, the corners of Han Shuo's mouth hooked into a sinister sneer. He had found a way to deal with the Shrine of Ice. Hey, kid, didn't you say you would bring me to the human world?" The fat lady continued to urge Han Shuo without the slightest scruple. "Elizabeth," Han Shuo softly called out. "Master, what can I do for you?" Elizabeth's body had now returned to normal. After experiencing the unforgettable agony, Elizabeth's body was brimming with the divine energy of Ice Celestial Kori and the others. Without the support of Ice Celestial Kori and the others, the divine energy could be slowly absorbed by Elizabeth's body of divine favor. As the saying goes, one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later on. This time, not only did the fat lady evolve from the Lord of the Flames to the Emperor of the Flames, even Elizabeth had gained many benefits. Once she could completely absorb the divine energy in her body, Elizabeth's strength would naturally advance a step further. Bring her to tour Lancelot Empire. If she gets bored, send her to Bredel City. Understood? Han Shuo looked at Elizabeth and instructed with narrowed eyes. Elizabeth clearly understood Han Shuo's intention. She respectfully nodded and replied, "Rest assured, master. I will let her enjoy herself to the fullest." All right, let's go," the fat lady said impatiently. She grabbed the Fire Elite Zombie and was about to leave. Hold on. Han Shuo saw that the Emperor of the Flames would not let go of the Fire Elite Zombie and hastily shouted, "Can't he leave with you?" "Why? This is my child. Why can't he leave with me?" The fat lady was somewhat displeased. She glared at Han Shuo and snorted. "He's also my child." Han Shuo blurted out again after being anxious. All the dark dragons, including Gilgs, as well as Elizabeth, had odd expressions when they heard Han Shuo's words. Han Shuo also felt a chill run down his spine. He forced a smile and said, "It's better for him to follow me. From his tone, it sounded like a divorced couple fighting over the custody of their child. The Lord of the Flames was furious. Just as she was about to say something, the Fire Elite zombie suddenly tugged at the corner of her clothes and communicated with her through telepathy. The Emperor of the Flames had a gloomy expression on her face. After a while, she finally relaxed. She glared at Han Shuo and said, "Take good care of our child." She grabbed Elizabeth and flew straight out of the dark forest. Han Shuo was speechless. Chapter 477. After finishing those words, the Emperor of the Flames left, leaving behind Han Shuo speechlessly looking at Fire Elite Zombie. He was amazed at the conversation between Fire Elite Zombie and the Emperor of the Flames. Hence, he transmitted and asked, "What did you say to her?" "Nothing much. I just said that the Netherworld is my home and that I still have many things to do there." Fire Elite Zombie calmly replied. He had never lied to Han Shuo. Han Shuo knew that the Emperor of the Flames had long known of Fire Elite Zombie's origins. It was only because both of them had absorbed an enormous amount of yuan energy of fire from the place of extreme fire that their auras were shockingly similar that she treated Fire Elite Zombie like a child. Only Fire Elite Zombie could communicate with the Emperor of the Flames and pacify her, lest she lose control of herself from her excitement. "All right, I'll send you back." Han Shuo thought for a moment. Seeing that there was nothing for Fire Elite Zombie to do for the time being, and that he should be able to make faster progress in the Netherworld, Han Shuo chanted an incantation and sent Fire Elite Zombie away. After chanting the incantation, Han Shuo formed a brief communication with the Netherworld. At the place where Fire Elite Zombie landed, he sensed a message transmitted by Little Skull. From the message, Han Shuo understood that Little Skull was still fusing with the Origin Crystal of Death. This process seemed to have been going on for a long time. The reason why Little Skull would suddenly warn Han Shuo was because Little Skull sensed Han Shuo's boundless sorrow. Therefore, he took the time to warn Han Shuo. Han Shuo sent a message to Little Skull, telling him to be at ease while fusing with the energy. Then, he took a deep breath, looked at the crowd of dark dragons, and asked in a deep voice, "What do you plan to do in the future?" "After we recover our strength, we dark dragons will take revenge for our clansmen." Gilgs had a resolute look on his face. It seemed that he had made up his mind to vent his hatred towards Gilbert on the Shrine of Ice. However, although Ice Celestial Corey and the others had suffered heavy losses, the dark dragons were still overestimating themselves if they wanted to contend against the Shrine of Ice. Han Shuo intended to say a few words of persuasion. However, on second thought, he realized that doing so would be a blow to their morale. Hence, he hesitated for a moment and ultimately decided against it. However, the experienced Gilbert already understood what Han Shuo wanted to say from his hesitant expression, so he said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. We'll be fine. Besides, we were captured because we weren't prepared. Our black dragon race has lived for so many years, we are not so easily bullied." Han Shuo looked at Gilgs. He felt that Gilgs seemed to have something else to rely on. This dark dragon who had lived for so many years ought to be able to see further than him. Therefore, Han Shuo nodded and said, "Then be careful. I hope that I can see Gilbert again." Gilgs gazed deeply at Han Shuo. His tone was somewhat sentimental and pleading. "There will be a chance. Don't worry." "Oh, right. This time, those from the Shrine of Ice have suffered rather serious injuries. I believe they won't dare to come to your Black Dragon Canyon for the time being," Han Shuo said. "Thank you, Brian. Our race of dark dragons will be your friends forever." Gilgs sincerely expressed his gratitude. "You're welcome. And goodbye." Han Shuo did not continue exchanging pleasantries with Gilgs. With a faint smile, he left through the air with the art of the demonic ninth heavens. Kasi Empire's northernmost snowy region. Snowy mountains rose and fell continuously, shrouded in a world of bone-chilling cold all year round. As far as the eye could see, it was forever monotonous snow-white. At the top of the ice peaks that pierced through the clouds, there were some solemn and dignified shrines built from ice crystals and cold jades. The ice peak at the center was especially tall and straight. The headquarters of the Shrine of Ice was located at the top of the tallest ice peak. The bone-chilling wind blew, and the sky was covered in ice and snow. In this pure white world of ice resided many followers of the Shrine of Ice. Most of them were citizens of Kasi Empire. Here, they offered their most pious faith to the ice goddess. For many years, the central main peak had always been a forbidden area. Apart from special festivals and the followers of the Shrine of Ice with noble status, ordinary people could not set foot on the main peak. However, in the past 2 days, an unimaginable event happened that broke this rule. The followers of the surrounding mountain peaks ascended the main peak one after another. In fear and trepidation, they used their meager divine energy to once again solidify the largest shrine of ice on the main peak. 2 days ago, amidst the bone-chilling cold of the snowy region, the Shrine of Ice on the coldest main peak suddenly began to melt. Several elders of the Shrine of Ice, and even one of its highest leaders, Ice Celestial Kori, were injured and recuperated. This grievous news instantly spread throughout the entire Shrine of Ice. Was it because the ice goddess was enraged by their incompetence? Or was it because demons were about to invade the Shrine of Ice? Many followers were secretly guessing in their hearts. They were frightened by the changes in the Shrine of Ice and did not understand what had actually happened. This strange situation, which had not occurred for hundreds and thousands of years, had caused immeasurable negative effects on the Shrine of Ice. Gradually, panic began to spread among the followers of the Shrine of Ice in the snowy region. Even some followers of the Shrine of Ice who were far away in other regions learned of the tragic changes at the headquarters of the Shrine of Ice. Far north of Kasi Empire, Icicle City. Icicle City was one of the many cities surrounding the snowy region of the far north. It would only take an average adventurer squad 10 days to travel from Icicle City to the Shrine of Ice in the depths of the snowy region. On this day, after a long and arduous journey, Han Shuo arrived at Icicle City and began to carry out his revenge against the Shrine of Ice. Han Shuo's plan was very simple. Just like how he dealt with the Church of Light, he would directly release his consciousness and draw the six-horned tribal king of the soul race over to kill him. The only difference was that Han Shuo could now easily release his consciousness. Even if the six-horned tribal king of the soul race came over, Han Shuo only needed to conceal his consciousness, and he could vanish from the six-horned tribal king's senses. There was one more point. Han Shuo could be sure that there was no godly existence in the Shrine of Ice like the saintess on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Otherwise, they would have all been frozen to death even before they reached the place of extreme fire when they fought using the Jade Frost Cage a few days ago. From the fact that Snow Celestial Tiana had to flee to the Church of Light to hide from the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, it could be seen that there was no one in the Shrine of Ice who could match the six-horned tribal king. Otherwise, Tiana would have returned to the Shrine of Ice straight away instead of wholeheartedly seeking the Church of Light. Given the strength of the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, once he arrived at the Shrine of Ice, and Han Shuo suddenly concealed his consciousness, the six-horned tribal king would certainly search for Han Shuo's traces all over the mountains and plains. The Shrine of Ice was just as arrogant as the Church of Light. A great battle would break out almost immediately. When the six-horned tribal king of the soul race arrived at the Shrine of Ice, and there was no other godly existence of the same level in the Shrine of Ice, Han Shuo was already somewhat looking forward to how much damage the six-horned tribal king could inflict on the Shrine of Ice. After the six-horned tribal king of the soul race locked onto Han Shuo also sensed the ice-cold, merciless killing intent of the six-horned tribal king. However, what surprised Han Shuo was that the six-horned tribal king did not take any immediate action. He was somewhat stunned. Han Shuo had stayed in Icicle City for an entire morning, yet he did not sense the six-horned tribal king approaching. This meant that the six-horned tribal king was still in Tarag Canyon. This had obviously ruined Han Shuo's wishful thinking. Han Shuo cursed inwardly. His consciousness could still sense the boundless killing intent coming from the distant Tarag Canyon. However, the six-horned tribal king's inaction had rendered Han Shuo's plan impossible. Previously, when Han Shuo escaped from Tarag Canyon, the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, along with 4 of his generals, almost immediately killed their way to the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. They charged forward with a ferocious momentum, ready to kill anyone who stood in their way. Han Shuo did not expect that the six-horned tribal king would actually remain indifferent after sensing his presence so soon. This made Han Shuo rather baffled. Could it be that the soul race had changed? Han Shuo immediately denied this thought. Ever since the first time Han Shuo saw this race, he could tell from their ice-cold, merciless eyes that they were heartless by nature. In addition, the tremendous killing intent from the six-horned tribal king was still there. This indicated that he had not changed his mind about Han Shuo. There must be some other reason. Han Shuo's mind raced. Could it be that the six-horned tribal king was injured on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light? Han Shuo felt that this was more likely, unless the six-horned tribal king was injured in the battle with the Saints and was now in a critical period of recuperation. Only then would he let him and the old monster Stadholm off for the time being. When he thought of this, Han Shuo could not help but rejoice for Stadholm. He thought that as long as Stadholm could make use of this time gap to fuse with his soul, he would no longer have to worry about the threat of the six-horned tribal king. Since the six-horned tribal king could not come for the time being, Han Shuo had no choice but to make other plans. Seeing that the Great Snow Mountain was within reach, Han Shuo decided to go to the headquarters of the Shrine of Ice to investigate. Without the presence of any God-rank experts, Han Shuo believed that he could freely enter and exit the Shrine of Ice without worrying about his own safety. After making up his mind, Han Shuo immediately set off. He traveled alone toward the snowy region where the Shrine of Ice was located. Han Shuo, who could not wait for the six-horned tribal king to come looking for him, fully unleashed his consciousness. Not even the slightest movement in the surroundings could escape his prying eyes. He headed straight for the Shrine of Ice unimpeded. Chapter 478. This was a world of ice and snow. This was the coldest place on profound continent. Frigid winds howled along the way. As far as the eye could see, a vast expanse of snow covered every corner. Ancient trees, rocks, and rivers were all covered in ice and snow. It was as though there was no second color between heaven and earth. In this bone-chilling region, Han Shuo's consciousness could sense traces of magical beasts. Ice bears, snow wolves, and frost eagles, these magical beasts that preferred cold environments, roamed the uninhabited world of ice and snow, adding some vitality to this world. Along the way, Han Shuo's target was one of the many icy peaks. His killing intent was awe-inspiring, his heart as cold as ice. The two most frightening figures of the Shrine of Ice were Ice Celestial Kori and Snow Celestial Tiana. They were the true pillars of the Shrine of Ice. Of the two, Snow Celestial Tiana had schemed against Han Shuo on the sacred mountain, nearly causing Han Shuo to be captured alive by the Church of Light. As for Ice Celestial Kori, not only had he wiped out the entire race of dark dragons, he was also the cause of Gilbert's death. On top of that, the Shrine of Ice and the Church of Light were solid allies. Han Shuo couldn't find any reason not to retaliate against them. When he was about to approach the central icy peak, Han Shuo slowed down his flying speed. He fully unfolded his consciousness, concealing the aura on his body. While carefully observing every movement on the main peak, he searched for a way to enter the main peak undetected. Holding his breath and concentrating, Han Shuo's consciousness immediately sensed the boundary of frost all around the icy peak. The boundary enveloped the entire main peak. Fierce, frigid winds and solid ice wrapped around the central peak. Amidst the frigid winds and solid ice, Han Shuo sensed the presence of the divine energy of the ice goddess. This discovery made Han Shuo even more cautious. The speed at which he approached the main peak of the Shrine of Ice slowed down even more. His mind was rapidly pondering countermeasures. One after another, disciples of the Shrine of Ice entered and exited the icy peak. However, the boundary that enveloped the main peak all year round never gave any warning, nor did it make any counterattack. Han Shuo carefully observed for a moment and discovered that some of these disciples who had entered the main peak of the Shrine of Ice actually did not possess the divine power of the ice goddess. However, without exception, their bodies were ice cold. much lower than the average person's body temperature. After observing for a while, Han Shuo came to a conclusion. Hovering in the sky at an altitude difficult to see with the naked eye, Han Shuo slowly adjusted his body's temperature. He even converted an appropriate amount of cold energy into the mystical glacial spell fire. In an extremely short period of time, Han Shuo's body temperature had reached the same level as the disciples of the Shrine of Ice below. On the profound continent, there were existences stronger than Han Shuo. However, Han Shuo believed that no one could surpass him in terms of physical control. This was the confidence that came from the demonic arts towards the abnormal forging of the body. After adjusting his body's temperature, Han Shuo observed for a while to ensure that he would not trigger any abnormalities in the boundary around the icy peak. Only then did he start searching for an opportunity to enter the main peak. After observing for a while, Han Shuo discovered a precipitous cliff that jutted out halfway up the icy peak. There was not a single disciple of the Shrine of Ice stationed in that area. Having ascertained his target, Han Shuo seized the opportunity and noiselessly descended to that cliff from the sky. Han Shuo, whose consciousness had firmly locked onto the entire icy peak, had long discovered Ice Celestial Corey's location while deliberately concealing the aura and energy on his body, inside an ice cone-shaped building at the summit of the icy peak. At this moment, Ice Celestial Corey should be recuperating from his injuries. Han Shuo could sense that Corey's aura was stable, without the slightest emotional fluctuation. There was not a single person stationed around that ice cone-shaped building. As long as Han Shuo could approach that building stealthily, Han Shuo was confident that his sneak attack would succeed. However, to reach that building from the cliff where Han Shuo was, without being detected by anyone along the way was virtually impossible. This was because on the entire icy peak, apart from the steep mountain path, there were no trees or rocks that could provide cover. In this boundless world covered in ice and snow, any movement could be captured by others. Moreover, within a magical tower at the summit of the icy peak, Han Shuo even discovered magical undulations similar to the eye of the sky. The magic released by that magical tower seemed to be able to see every movement on the entire icy peak. After pondering for a moment with his brows creased, Han Shuo suddenly thought of Metal Elite Zombie. After quickly spinning his brain, he immediately felt that this method was feasible. Although this icy peak was covered in solid ice, its interior was still supported by solid rock. The thick layer of ice surrounding the icy peak was formed naturally on one hand, and was intentionally created by the Shrine of Ice on the other. As long as he could break through the solid ice and reach the rock, using Metal Elite Zombie's ability, Han Shuo could completely penetrate through the rock and reach the bottom of the building where Ice Celestial Corey was located. This method is feasible. Han Shuo immediately spread open his hands. His fingernails suddenly grew into the shape of demonic blades. The demonic blades, glinting with cold light, were incomparably sharp. Under the infusion of demonic arts, Han Shuo broke through the 3-meter layer of ice bit by bit and saw the foundation that supported the icy peak, the rock. As soon as Han Shuo gave the command, Metal Elite Zombie tacitly understood. His palms glowed with golden light as the yuan energy of metal flowed into the rock like flowing water. Then, under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the solid rock split open to reveal a path. The 5 elite zombies, regardless of their individual strengths, were indeed of great help to Han Shuo. Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh in his heart as he looked at the creation of the tunnel. Following Ice Celestial Corey's position, Han Shuo, with Metal Elite Zombie's assistance, slowly made his way from the center of the mountainside to the summit of the icy peak where Ice Celestial Corey was located. Metal Elite Zombie could freely enter and exit the rock, but with the addition of Han Shuo, he had no choice but to open up a path. Under the release of dazzling golden light from his hands, the solid rock split, recombined, and compacted, forming a path that extended upwards in a way that Han Shuo could not comprehend. As the tunnel was illuminated by the dazzling golden light from Metal Elite Zombie's hands, Han Shuo did not feel the slightest bit of darkness. While following behind Metal Elite Zombie, he inwardly pondered the details of his sneak attack on Ice Celestial Corey. Suddenly, Metal Elite Zombie abruptly stopped. Caught off guard, Han Shuan nearly crashed into Metal Elite Zombie. They had only traveled 100 meters and were still a long distance away from the summit of the icy peak where Ice Celestial Quarry was. Why did Metal Elite Zombie suddenly stop? Han Shuan was puzzled. He couldn't help but look at Metal Elite Zombie's back and transmitted. Why did he stop? Father, look. Metal Elite Zombie leaned his body to one side. The surrounding rock shrank a little more, allowing Han Shuan and Metal Elite Zombie to stand side by side. Han Shuan took a step forward and stood at the spot Metal Elite Zombie had intentionally vacated. Following the direction Metal Elite Zombie's right hand was pointing at, Han Shuan was immediately dumbstruck by what he saw. Before Han Shuan, the belly of the mountain had been hollowed out. A majestic statue of the ice goddess, approximately 60 meters tall, was sitting in the hollowed-out belly of the mountain. This enormous and majestic statue of the ice goddess was formed from solid ice that was as bright as crystal. The sculpture was vivid and lifelike. She wore a frosty expression on her face. Her left hand tightly grasped a crystal staff that was similarly sculpted from solid ice. She looked as though she was in battle with some evil demon. Her expression was solemn and dignified, carrying an air of inviolable holiness. The statue of the ice goddess wore a peculiar white robe. However, as the entire statue was constructed from the same transparent solid ice, Han Shuan was able to clearly see the inside of her body. There were no internal organs within the body of the ice goddess. There was only a peculiar substance that was a mixture of ice and water circulating within. It sparkled with a dazzling brilliance like a diamond and slowly flowed within her body according to some mysterious trajectory. However, in the womb of the ice goddess stood a beautiful naked young lady with skin of ice and bones of jade. This young lady's eyes were peacefully closed. There was not the slightest trace of life coming from her. However, her beauty was comparable to that of the saintess of the Church of Light. It was a kind of perfection that shouldn't exist in the secular world. Han Shuan was standing at the foot of the ice goddess statue. When he raised his head to look at this majestic statue, a feeling of insignificance immediately welled up from the bottom of his heart. He was momentarily stunned by this ice goddess statue that suddenly appeared in the middle of the mountain. What was certain was that the ice goddess statue was indeed carved from an enormous block of solid ice. For the Shrine of Ice to have such an enormous ice goddess statue in the middle of the mountain, there must be a reason for its existence. After Han Shuan came to his senses, he was horrified and his eyes sparkled. That naked young lady in the womb of the ice goddess statue was ice-cold and lifeless. Han Shua's consciousness couldn't detect the slightest fluctuation of her soul. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't figure out why there would be such a bizarre scene in the middle of the mountain. Just as Han Shuan was racking his brains, a creaking sound suddenly came from the rock wall above the ice goddess statue. Under Han Shua's attentive gaze, a large cliff slowly protruded from the rock wall. On top of it stood a few Shrine of Ice disciples. When the first creaking sound was heard, Han Shuan unconsciously took a step back and rapidly issued an order to Metal Elite Zombie. Metal Elite Zombie swiped his hand across the rock wall, and the crack in front of him rapidly shrank. When the rock wall above the ice goddess statue completely protruded, the crack in front of Han Shuan and Metal Elite Zombie had shrunk to the point where only a small gap remained. Chapter 479. Through that narrow gap, Han Shua's eyes lit up. He stared at the few people standing on the cliff above the ice goddess statue, cautiously listening to their worrisome conversation. Sigh, I wonder when it will be completed. It's been more than 100 years, one of the Shrine of Ice disciples sighed. Ever since Project God Creation was launched, it has consumed countless manpower and material resources of our shrine. Now that we have reached the most critical juncture, we absolutely cannot be careless. The reason why our Shrine of Ice has been suppressed by the Church of Light and the Calamity Church for so many years is because we do not have our own true God on Profound Continent. We are unable to attract more disciples because we cannot manifest our miracles in the world. Once our Project God Creation succeeds, our shrine of ice will surely change our current situation and become a church admired by everyone on profound continent. We will no longer have to submit to anyone. Another disciple who came over explained in an ice-cold voice. Project God Creation? Han Shua's heart was in turmoil. He was astounded by what he heard. By now, Han Shua had long believed that gods existed in this world. Spider Goddess Rose had crossed several realms to face his consciousness attack, the saintess hidden deep within the sacred mountain of the Church of Light, and the six-horned tribal king of the Solnet clan had proven to Han Shua that gods were not imaginary. However, in Han Shua's mind, even the weakest of gods had to go through thousands of years of accumulation to slowly comprehend the essence of the world's elements or edictal laws, gradually breaking through the shackles of their own bodies and eventually breaking through their own shackles. This was the first time Han Shua had heard of the term God Creation. This was the most arrogant and most shocking statement he had heard in all these years. At this moment, Han Shua's understanding of gods had been completely destroyed by the Shrine of Ice. Could God be created as well? This project has reached its final stage. With just a few more days, we will be able to complete this experiment and achieve the magnificent feat of directly evolving a god from a divine benefactor within 100 years. What a magnificent experiment this is! Therefore, we cannot afford to make any mistakes during this period of time. One of them shouted in a deep voice. His tone was filled with indescribable pride. Divine benefactor? Han Shua was shocked again. After thinking for a while, he completely believed in the authenticity of this plan. The body structure of a body of divine favor was different from that of an ordinary person. They often had strange abilities, such as Janet's extraordinary strength or Elizabeth's ability to absorb divine power. There were also many people with the body of divine favor who could easily communicate with a certain element in the world. As long as they practiced the magic of that element, their progress would be beyond imagination. Perhaps in 1/10 or even 1/100th of an ordinary person's time, they would be able to reach the level of an ordinary person in that element of magic. For a long time, Han Shua had been very curious about the possessors of the body of divine favor. He was curious about the special abilities that their bodies brought to them. Now, after listening to these people, Han Shua vaguely understood something. Were those with the body of divine grace the descendants of the gods? All right, pour the energy crystals in. Let's hurry up and leave. One of them urged impatiently. As soon as this person finished speaking, Han Shua immediately began to pay attention to the cliff above the ice goddess statue. He saw them taking out crystal fragments rich in water element from their space rings, carefully carrying them with magic and placing them into the crack on the crown of the ice goddess statue. As soon as the crystal fragments containing the water element entered the ice goddess statue, they rapidly melted with the mixture of ice and water within the statue. Through the mixture of ice and snow, strands of water element slowly flowed into the beautiful, naked maiden within the child palace of the statue. In a short while, these people had already placed many energy crystals into the ice goddess statue. They carefully examined it once to ensure that the ice goddess statue was operating normally. Only then did they shrink the crack on the top of the cliff, disappearing from Han Shua's line of sight. As soon as these people disappeared, Han Shua immediately focused all of his attention back on the ice goddess statue. Looking at this colossal ice goddess statue that the Shrine of Ice had spent 100 years to create, he couldn't help but gasp in amazement. The maiden with skin of ice and bones of jade inside the ice goddess statue did not have any aura of life on her. She was like a peculiar vessel, containing an enormous mixture of ice and water energy within her. After staring at the ice goddess statue and pondering for a while, Han Shua immediately made up his mind. He must destroy this ice goddess statue, including the true god that might be produced within it. The Shrine of Ice and Han Shua had a deep and irreconcilable hatred. Now that the Shrine of Ice did not have a god-tier expert, Han Shua could take the initiative in the battle against the Shrine of Ice. However, once this god-tier expert was produced, Han Shua believed that the Shrine of Ice would never let him off. When that time came, he would probably have to face the endless pursuit of this god-tier expert. Taking advantage of the fact that this god-making project had yet to be completed, Han Shuo decided to ignore Ice Celestial Quarry for the time being. He would first eradicate this enemy that could possibly pose the greatest threat to him. There was an intense presence of water element in the surroundings of the ice goddess statue. Han Shuo discovered those extremely complicated magical boundaries and traps as soon as he entered. It would be easy for Han Shuo to reach the bottom of Ice Celestial Quarry's building with Metal Elite Zombies' power. However, to reach the ice goddess statue without triggering any magical boundaries or traps was no easy feat. His eyes glinting, Han Shuo had already decided to barge through those boundaries and traps by force and destroy this ice goddess statue with the force of a thunderbolt. His mind started to ponder the steps of his plan of action, weighing how he could eliminate any future threats in the shortest time possible. It was at this moment that Han Shuo suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He recalled Water Elite Zombie of the 5 Elite Zombies. As a water sprite refined from the Yuan energy of water, the Water Elite Zombie was proficient in using ice and water. In such an area, the traps and boundaries around the ice goddess statue were actually formed from ice and water. With the Water Elite Zombie taking action, they might be able to reach the ice goddess statue without alerting anyone. As soon as this idea leapt into Han Shuo's mind, he immediately got to work. After chanting a magical incantation, Water Elite Zombie immediately appeared next to Han Shuo. Metal Elite Zombie took the initiative to step back, making space for Water Elite Zombie and Han Shuo to stand side by side. Is there any way to bring me to the body of the statue without alerting anyone? Han Shuo transmitted. Water Elite Zombie did not immediately reply. After a while, Water Elite Zombie still did not reply. This rather baffled Han Shuo. Among the 5 Elite Zombies, although Water Elite Zombie came out a bit later and did not have the opportunity to possess water element treasures, having evolved for such a long time, he should have long possessed intelligence. He shouldn't be this slow. Puzzled, Han Shuo creased his brows. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at Water Elite Zombie, wanting to see what was going on with him. Suddenly, Han Shuo was startled. He saw Water Elite Zombie's eyes sparkle with a dazzling radiance. Misty water vapor suddenly drifted out of his body. Standing beside him, Han Shuo could feel the surrounding humidity increase. Water Elite Zombie's emotions were also fluctuating, as if he had suddenly encountered something that made him incomparably excited. Following Water Elite Zombie's gaze, Han Shuo discovered that Water Elite Zombie was staring blankly at the young girl inside the ice goddess statue. His eyes did not even blink, as if he had simply become stupid. Oh no! Han Shuo was startled. He inwardly thought that Water Elite Zombie couldn't have fallen in love with the young girl inside, right? Han Shuo's heart was a tangled mess. He stared at Water Elite Zombie, feeling somewhat baffled. He had no idea what was going on with him. What's going on? Han Shuo softly shouted. This soft shout was extremely loud. Han Shuo wanted to rouse Water Elite Zombie. Therefore, he deliberately did so. Han Shuo's shout was indeed effective. Water Elite Zombie's body suddenly jolted. He first looked at Han Shuo in a daze, but soon after, his eyes shone brightly. He excitedly pointed at the young girl from the Shrine of Ice and said to Han Shuo, "Father, I want her." This scoundrel, his evolution is indeed messed up. Back when he was in the Penta-Elemental Undead formation, he was unable to fuse with it. So it turns out that his desire for evolution is out of control. Moreover, his eyesight is rather sharp. Damn it, scoundrel kid. Why did you evolve to this state? Han Shuo cursed incessantly in his heart. His imagination ran wild as he looked at Water Elite Zombie. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. Han Shuo had genuine feelings for the 5 Elite Zombies. Although this request of Water Elite Zombie was unimaginable to Han Shuo, when he saw Water Elite Zombie's excitement and impulsiveness, he couldn't bear to refuse. Han Shuo stomped his foot, gnashed his teeth and said, "Go, little scoundrel. Do whatever you want, but by all means, don't alarm anyone. Damn it, even those brothers who came out earlier than you aren't as precocious as you are." After receiving Han Shuo's approval, Water Elite Zombie suddenly jumped in excitement. He actually passed through the ice and water magic traps and boundaries and landed at the foot of the ice goddess statue in an instant. He didn't alarm any boundaries or traps. While Han Shuo cursed in his heart, Water Elite Zombie directly melted into the Ice Goddess statue. He floated up from one of the calves of the Ice Goddess statue to where the young girl with skin of ice and bones of jade was. In high spirits, he hugged that lifeless, perfect young girl. Chapter 480. Han Shuo couldn't bear to see such a perfect young lady being defiled by Water Elite Zombie. However, just as Han Shuo was about to turn his head away, he sensed that the young lady within the Ice Goddess statue suddenly underwent a peculiar transformation. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the energy within the body of the young lady with ice flesh and jade bone rapidly flowed into Water Elite Zombie's body. Water Elite Zombie hugged the naked young lady, but didn't engage in the obscene acts that Han Shuo had imagined. He merely made use of physical contact to rapidly absorb the energy within the young lady's body. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before coming to his senses. He was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. He had long tossed aside the unspoken criticism he had for Water Elite Zombie and started to become excited just like Water Elite Zombie. The energy contained within the young lady's body was filled with the wondrous energy of ice and water. However, there wasn't a shred of divine energy bestowed by the Ice Goddess. This was rather strange. Previously, when he had the Jade Frost cage, Han Shuo had also tried to let Water Elite Zombie absorb the divine energy within the Jade Frost cage. However, Water Elite Zombie was unable to establish a connection with the divine energy within the Jade Frost cage, and naturally couldn't absorb the divine energy from within. Therefore, when he saw the Ice Goddess statue and the young lady within, Han Shuo didn't think of letting Water Elite Zombie absorb the energy. Now, it seemed that although Water Elite Zombie couldn't absorb the divine energy bestowed by the Ice Goddess believers, he could absorb the bizarre energy that was a mixture of the water element and ice and water. The Water Elite Zombie, who was holding the girl in his arms, was shrouded in white mist. The energy within the lifeless girl's body flowed into the Water Elite Zombie's body at an extremely fast speed like a trickle of water. Han Shuo could sense Water Elite Zombie's excitement. His eyes were glowing with vigor. As he rapidly absorbed the energy within the young lady's body, he transmitted to Han Shuo, "Thank you, Father. Thank you, Father. Your luck is pretty good." Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He then felt a little embarrassed for having such dirty thoughts earlier. "Father, I believe that he will be able to fuse his energy into the formation after this." The Fire Elite Zombie beside Han Shuo transmitted. With Fire Elite Zombie's reminder, Han Shuo was once again delighted. In the Penta-Elemental Undead formation, Fire Elite Zombie, Metal Elite Zombie, and Earth Elite Zombie were already able to fuse the three energies. Only Water Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie had been unable to fuse their energies with the three of them due to the fact that they had come out of the Penta-Elemental Undead formation rather late and had not obtained any wood or water attribute treasures. Compared to their calm and unruffled demeanor during the battle in the Black Dragon Canyon, their auras were in utter chaos. This indicated that they had yet to fully recover from their injuries. "Goddess, what is that thing?" Suddenly, a disciple clutched his chest, trembling from head to toe as he pointed at Water Elite Zombie, who was tightly hugging that young lady with skin of ice and bones of jade. Unable to bear it any longer, he shrieked. While this disciple was shrieking, the disciples of the Shrine of Ice on top of the cliff had also seen the situation below. All the disciples of the Shrine of Ice, including Ice Celestial Kori, were instantly enraged. Cries of alarm and rage filled the entire mountainside. "What an ugly thing! How did he get inside the Ice Goddess statue?" Ice Celestial Kori bellowed furiously. He slapped the face of a disciple beside him. That disciple was slapped until his mouth was full of blood, and he immediately fell from the cliff. Whoosh whoosh. Before that disciple could fall to the ground, the magical boundary surrounding the Ice Goddess statue was suddenly triggered. Several icicles directly pierced through the disciple's body. Before his blood could flow, his entire body was frozen stiff. When he landed on the ground, he shattered into ice cubes. Lord Kori, spare us." We don't know what's going on either. If you kill all of us, Project God-making will never be completed." One of the disciples suddenly cried out in alarm and knelt before Ice Celestial Corey, yelling loudly. Ice Celestial Corey, whose face was ashen and furious, was about to kill all those disciples who had previously come down to add crystal energy. His hand was already gripping the neck of another disciple, preparing to kill this derelict disciple as well. However, when he heard that disciple kneeling down and yelling loudly, for the sake of Project God-making, he finally held back his impulse. "Use your divine energy to enter the Ice Goddess statue at once and kill that ugly thing. I want his soul to suffer all kinds of torture." Ice Celestial Corey casually tossed away the person in his hand and bellowed furiously as he looked down. It seemed that he was indeed very angry. Come to think of it, this Project God-making, which the Shrine of Ice had been working on for 100 years, was about to be completed. Just as Ice Celestial Corey's dream of surpassing the Calamity Church of Light was about to be fulfilled, such an unforeseen event occurred at the most crucial moment. One could well imagine the fury in Ice Celestial Corey's heart after enduring for God knows how many years. "Yes, yes, my lord." Even those true experts who had devoted themselves to the Shrine of Ice for many years were trembling with fear under Ice Celestial Corey's wrath. They hastily responded and immediately began to deal with Water Elite Zombie. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. All of a sudden, shrill whistling sounds were heard. One after another, sharp bone spears pierced through the air. Like broken bamboo rafts, they charged at Ice Celestial Corey and the others in rows. "Damn it!" Corey cursed in a stern voice. He hastily unsheathed his ice-cold longsword. Rays of sword radiance flashed past. Sparkling and translucent cold air condensed into an ice wall, blocking the bone spears that filled the sky. "You useless idiots, go back to where you came from." Ice Celestial Corey, who had hastily blocked a wave of bone spears, cursed loudly as he lifted his leg and kicked the disciple kneeling at his feet. Although these disciples of the Shrine of Ice who came last time were also priests of the Shrine of Ice, they majored in alchemy, pharmaceutics, magical matrices, and other complicated and esoteric subjects. It was because of these that they could successfully carry out the God Creation Project. However, their personal strengths were not particularly strong. Under Han Shua's all-encompassing attacks, it was highly possible that they would be carelessly eliminated. Having lost these disciples who had studied the God Creation Project for many years, it would be very difficult for the God Creation Project to be completed. Therefore, although Ice Celestial Corey wished that he could kill them immediately, for the sake of the success of the God Creation Project, he had no choice but to put their safety first. Ice Celestial Corey let loose a torrent of curses as he kicked and tossed, forcibly shoving these cultists who were experts in this field into the passageway. Then, he bellowed in a seemingly insane manner, "Come out, Brian. I know it's you, you filthy, damned necromancer." Under extreme rage, Ice Celestial Corey's usual composure vanished without a trace. At this moment, he was somewhat similar to Han Shua in his demonized state. He was no different from a lunatic. Even the few subordinates beside him were somewhat astonished by his madness. "Pursue those few who escaped and kill them all." Han Shua calmly issued an order to Metal Elite Zombie to kill those researchers. Only then did he walk out of a tunnel with a gloomy face. Chapter 481. With the intention of buying time for Water Elite Zombie, Han Shua, after instructing Metal Elite Zombie, unhurriedly strolled out and stood proudly at the foot of the Ice Goddess statue. "It's really you." Ice Celestial Corey bellowed in rage. Pointing the icy long sword in his hand at Han Shua, he flew down from above. An icy aura overflowed from the long sword in his hand. The formless fighting aura drove a cold current. Sharp icicles tore through the air in an unstoppable manner. As Corey moved, several experts behind him swooshed down one after another. Those with sacred swordmaster strength were equally not to be underestimated. Their enormous energy firmly locked onto Han Shua, multiplying the pressure on Han Shua. Two more people stood motionless on the cliff, each holding a crystal staff. Magical incantations were rapidly chanted from their mouths. The water element in the belly of the mountain, which was already extremely dense, suddenly came alive. The temperature of the entire region abruptly dropped. Wisps of white, chilly air agilely converged towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo understood that these people, led by Ice Celestial Kori, were preparing to get rid of him in the shortest time possible before focusing all their energy on Water Elite Zombie wreaking havoc inside the Ice Goddess statue. These people possessed superb strength. Even though they were all injured, they indeed had the strength to attack at the same time. Under the management of the Shrine of Ice for hundreds of years, not only did the belly of the mountain contain extremely dense water element, it was also deployed with layers upon layers of magical boundaries and traps due to Project God creation. Fighting in such an area was extremely disadvantageous to Han Shuo. Therefore, he absolutely could not confront them head-on. As long as he was led by the nose, not only would he be unable to buy time for Water Elite Zombie, it would also be a problem for Han Shuo to leave the belly of the mountain alive. Seeing the attacks of Ice Celestial Kori and his party coming at him, Han Shuo, who had just walked out of the tunnel opened by Metal Elite Zombie, suddenly shrank back into it. The cracked stone wall was also very cooperative with Han Shuo. When Ice Celestial Kori flew down, the crack was about to rapidly mend itself. The smooth and flat stone wall made Ice Celestial Kori suspect that Han Shuo's previous appearance was just an illusion. Damn it! What's going on? Kori bellowed in rage, obviously aware of the truth of what happened. Watch out, Abra! A cry of alarm suddenly came from the mouths of the two magicians on the cliff. A sword saint who had been following behind Kori was frightened by the warning from above and looked around helplessly. Suddenly, the sword saint named Abra sensed a shocking change in the rock wall beside him. Crack! Halfway through his descent, the rock wall beside him suddenly shattered, and a hideous face in the shape of a ghost's face fiercely rushed out of the cracked rock wall and directly bit at him. Abra's descent came to a sudden halt. Golden light burst out of the crystal ice sword, and in an instant, hundreds of golden lights bombarded the sinister ghost face that was biting at him. Under Abra's gaze, the ferocious ghostly face that pounced over was bombarded with holes by the golden light. He heaved a sigh of relief in his heart, but he still carefully stared at the ferocious ghostly face. At his level of martial arts, he would never relax in the slightest during a battle. It was absolutely not easy to become a sword saint, and Abra was obviously no exception. His rich combat experience allowed him to react promptly, and he would never underestimate any enemy. It was precisely this quality that saved his life. Under his attentive gaze, the ferocious ghostly face that was bombarded with holes by his golden fighting aura did not disappear. Even the speed at which it pounced at him did not slow down in the slightest, and was still pouncing at him with a shrill howl. Abra's expression changed in horror. His body, which was frozen in midair, rapidly retreated. He brandished the crystal ice sword crisscrossed in front of his chest. Amidst the golden fighting aura, ice-cold divine energy was released. The divine energy bestowed by the ice goddess interweaved with his fighting aura, forming layers of defense. The ferocious ghostly face advanced another 3 meters, and finally turned into light smoke and disappeared. Right at this moment, after the ferocious ghostly face dissipated, an iron fist slowly enlarged in front of Abra. Its destructive momentum shocked him to the core. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. All the experts of the Shrine of Ice around Abra brandished their swords and attacked from afar. Icicles pierced straight at Han Shuo's exposed body amidst the whistling cold wind. With a cold snort, Han Shuo did not change the direction of his right fist, which was aimed at Abra. The demonic light from the demonic blades in his left hand burst forth. Han Shuo did not even look at them. The demonic light accurately shattered the icicles piercing at him. However, under the cover of the shattered icicles, several erratic cold currents suddenly attached themselves to Han Shuo's body. Several cold currents, condensed by the sacred magi using the enormous amount of water element in the belly of the mountain, attached themselves to Han Shuo's body. The bone-piercing coldness instantly seeped into his consciousness and physical body. Han Shuo's body couldn't help but stiffen, and his lightning-fast speed suddenly slowed. However, Abra still couldn't dodge in time. Clang! Han Shua's fist rumbled over, landing squarely on the hilt of Abra's crystal sword of ice. A power that could topple the mountains and overturn the seas surged towards sacred swordmaster Abra. All the fighting aura he used to defend himself was instantly washed away. Only the divine energy of ice bestowed by the ice goddess barely managed to stop this tremendous force from crazily destroying his body like a knife's edge. Ouch! A miserable howl, mixed with a large mouthful of blood, was fiercely shot out from Abra's mouth. He lost his balance. Just as he raised his head to the sky, his body tilted and flew backwards. With a thud, he heavily crashed into the rock wall on the other side. "Stop!" Ice Celestial Corey madly shouted as he charged over from below. Han Shua's speed had slowed down considerably after the cold currents entered his body. However, as he was extremely close to Abra, he still arrived before him very quickly. Paying no heed to Ice Celestial Corey, who was madly shouting and charging over, Han Shua's right fist turned into a flat, straight palm and ruthlessly stabbed at Abra's heart. "Abra, quick, run!" The two magi above, having seen through the whole situation, once again hurriedly reminded him. Only Abra himself understood that there was no way out. Seeing the palm stabbing at his chest at lightning speed, he exerted all his strength and thrust his sword at Han Shua's empty left hand. He clenched his left hand into a fist and ferociously punched at Han Shua's incoming palm. Bam! Like a peacock spreading its tail, just as Han Shua's palm was about to stab into Abra's fist, his fingernails abruptly expanded into the shape of demonic blades. Without waiting for Abra to react, the demonic blades easily pierced through Abra's fist, pierced through Abra's arm, and finally stabbed into Abra's heart, killing him in one blow. Pulling out his bloodied right hand, Han Shua grinned coldly. His smile contained 3 parts arrogance, 1 part calmness, and 6 parts cruelty. With his heart shattered, Abra's eyes were wide open in fear. Blood spurted out from his chest as he powerlessly fell to the ground. It was only at this moment that Ice Celestial Corey arrived. Looking at Han Shua, who was grinning coldly, Corey suddenly felt a chill in his heart. However, he knew that if Han Shua didn't die today, the Shrine of Ice would never have a day of peace. The dignity and solemnity of the shrine would be destroyed in one day. Kill. He must be killed. Ice Celestial Corey bellowed. He attacked with all his might, prepared to make Han Shua stay here forever. Suddenly, Han Shua, who had just killed Abra, turned his head and cast a glance at him with a smile. Soon after, he unhurriedly walked towards the wall that Abra, who was still dripping with blood, was leaning against. Under Abra's attentive gaze, the stone wall inconceivably opened up into a passageway. Han Shua unhurriedly walked into the stone wall. Then, Han Shua stood proudly in the passageway of the stone wall, facing Ice Celestial Corey, who was about to reach him. His face was still wearing the same cold smile. Ice Celestial Corey had yet to recover from his injuries. At this moment, his subordinates had yet to approach him, and the 2 magi above him were not fully prepared either. Ice Celestial Corey, whose heart was chilled, suddenly slowed down his rapid charge. He actually did not dare to confront Han Shua head-on. In just 2 seconds, Han Shua's body emitted popping sounds. The demonic arts had completely expelled the cold current that had invaded his body. "Ha, coward. The cold current in my body was still there. You originally had the chance to kill me." Han Shua's body was no longer stiff. With a long laugh, he looked at Ice Celestial Corey and taunted venomously. As soon as Han Shua's words fell, Ice Celestial Corey's subordinates arrived one after another. The 2 magi above him were finally fully prepared. Ice Celestial Corey's complexion was ashen. Gnashing his teeth, he spat out the word kill and finally took the lead in charging at Han Shua. At this moment, Han Shua took a step back. The stone wall in front of him once again miraculously closed up. When Ice Celestial Corey arrived, there was only a mirror-smooth stone wall in front of him. Where was Han Shu? My lord, this is not the way. If this continues, the energy inside the ice goddess statue will be completely depleted. Just as Ice Celestial Kori was furiously cursing Han Shuo again, a disciple finally could not help but remind him. As if enlightened, Ice Celestial Kori abruptly woke up with a start. Only now did he remember that the ugly thing inside the ice goddess statue was still hugging his test subject and sucking away its energy. Don't bother with that filthy necromancer. Get rid of that ugly thing first. Ice Celestial Kori's body trembled as he ordered his subordinates beside him. Ice Celestial Kori understood that he had truly been driven mad by Han Shuo. That was why he would act so irrationally. With his subordinates' reminder, Ice Celestial Kori finally realized that he had been played by Han Shuo. Yes, my lord. Several disciples hastily replied and immediately got to work on dealing with Water Elite Zombie, who was happily absorbing energy inside the ice goddess statue. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.